Welcome everybody to the second council meeting on the 30th of November 2022. We're just going to start this morning with a karakia, and councillors are welcome to join me. It's on the agenda, but I'll stand up and start. So if you want to join along, feel free. Whakataka te hau ki te ruru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, ehi akiana te atakura, e teo, e huka, e hauhu, ti hei, mō. Right, we'll move on to the housekeeping bits and bobs. Toilets are located just outside the chamber, directly down the hall on the right. Should there need to be an evacuation for any reason, please go down the stairs, not the elevator. And the assembly point is out in the car park on Space Street. Earthquakes, drop cover and hold, you can put under the table. Please turn your phones off. Appropriate timing. And this meeting is being recorded as well for the purpose of live video streaming and downloading. So by remaining in this meeting, you can see the screen and it's viewable by the public. Morning tea we're going to have at 10:30, and lunch we'll have at 12:30. So we'll kick off into the formal part of the meeting. We don't have any apologies. I assume Councillor Duffy is caught up and there's a bit of traffic coming into town, so I assume he'll be here soon. Do we have any leave of absence? Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, I'll be away from the 16th of December to the 16th of January.
Anyone else? Someone like to move that leave of absence be accepted? Thank you, Councillor Rachel, Councillor Mendes. All in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Right, do we have any conflict of interest today?
Potential conflict of interest for an item we've got in public excluded.
Which one of the PAs open? C8.2.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. No further conflict of interest?
Citizens Advice Bureau on the council representative on there, but I'm not sure whether that's a conversation on applications.
Okay, yes, we can.
District initiatives.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we haven't got any extraordinary items today, and that moves on to the minutes of the last meeting on page 6. So just noting that there's no discussion on the actual minutes other than their correctness, so confirmation that they're correct. So no other questions or anything like that on them, but would someone like to move that they're incorrect? Thank you, Councillor Menzies, Councillor Beauperoy. All in favour? Anyone against? Carried. Right, we don't have any public participation today, so we'll move on to our first report, which is 7.1 on page 29 of the agenda with the recommendations on 30 to 32. So our Governance Legal Manager will be, as well as myself, so I'll just give a bit of background as to my role in this. Basically, given the environment that we're in at the moment, I decided to have a really good look at the governance structure that we had last term, and how that sort of applies working forwards with the level of reform that we've got going on, with the most important one being the future for local government itself. So I wanted to sort of check the relevance of how we can sort of work going forward. And to me, I think we can actually come up with a blueprint model for how we can actually. I want to show Wellington how to run local government really well. We've got our community boards. There's a really strong desire for a localised approach, and I think we can foster that really well using our community boards and a grassroots up approach rather than that sort of top-down approach. So I want to try and keep it as simple as possible and make it really easy for people to work with council, including staff, community boards, community and councillors. Just get a simple, easy to work in environment. And that's kind of, every time I sort of looked at doing different committees, I kept coming back to having all of the council involved in council meetings and having regular meetings as well, so that we can move things through efficiently. So that sort of fed into what we've got now. We've also got the external appointments to the committees that are kind of the going concerns that have been running and that will carry on running anyway. So there's a list of those in there. And for the time being, I've just looked at sort of flattening out the committee structure, with the exception of finance and assurance, which I think everyone will agree it's a very valuable and prudent committee to have, and Bruce Robertson has skills and expertise that he has is well worth having on board. So I'll hand over to Mr. Rout. And
thank you. Your Worship. As you'll be aware, so this, I'll just speak to the report a bit. So this item's to approve and to bring into effect Council's governance structure and to make decisions on the elected member appointments that Rob's just mentioned. So Rob's exercised his powers under the Local Government Act to establish the Finance and Assurance Committee, the District Licensing Committee and the Ojai Railway Fund Committee. Mayor Scott's also considering whether or not to establish additional committees as part of Council's governance structure, and is probably going to make a final decision on that in the new year. So this report proposes that Council approve and bring into effect the specific committees, subcommittees and joint committees, and these are listed on page 30 of the agenda at recommendation E. The Mayor's also used his powers under the LGA to appoint the Chair of the Finance and Assurance Committee. As has just been mentioned, the Mayor has chosen to appoint Mr. Bruce Robertson to be the Chair, and staff will now proceed to negotiate the terms of that appointment. Most of you will be aware that Mr. Robertson performed this role in the 2019 to 22 triennium, and he's got considerable experience in the local government and auditing sectors. This report also proposes those appointments to the committees. The recommendations outline that, in addition to the chairperson, that all councillors and the mayor are members of the Finance and Assurance Committee. Some of the appointments to council organisations are to comply with trust deeds and company constitution requirements, and in some instances council has just been asked to make appointments to particular entities. So the appointments proposed in this report reflect conversations that the Mayor has had with councillors. Staff have become aware that there's one additional appointment that could be made at this meeting that isn't outlined in the report, and that's to the Citizens Advice Bureau. So Councillor Keese was appointed to the Citizens Advice Bureau in 2013 and has carried out this role since that date. So it's proposed to add to recommendation H an appointment to the Citizens Advice Bureau. So all the recommendations for this report are on page 30 to 32 of the agenda, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
thank you for that. Do we have any questions? Councillor Pires, you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not so much a question, but just a comment around the Finance and Assurance Committee and the indication that it's been there's been prudent decisions coming out of that. I'd just like to draw the Council's attention to a major strategy that's come from that committee, which is to borrow externally. This is additional borrowing externally. Those funds have been placed into money market funds, share markets and bonds. Now, I don't think that's particularly prudent, given that borrowing is unnecessary.
That's a discussion that we'll have going forward inside that committee, and yeah, you would have known from being a member of that committee last triennium and going through that discussion, but that is a discussion that can be had going forward inside that committee itself. So, yeah, thank you, Tom. Any further questions? Councillor Wilson?
Thanks. The Masuku Water Supply Committee will meeting on Friday, and former Councillor John Douglas is kindly joining, and under your advice is Phil, Tom and Brian and myself, and on the goings on. The future of that committee is meant to be set on Friday, or supposed to be set on Friday, so going forward there's a bit of a question of what that committee might actually entail, so just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and we can make any changes to this as we need to. It's a relatively fluid document, so we can. Yeah, thank you for that. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Byers again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Southland Regional Land Transport Joint Committee. I think that's a committee where there's a lot of opportunity for change in the way that they're suggesting we manage our roads. I wonder, is there an opportunity for other people to attend that? And I'd be interested to see that myself.
My belief is the way it's set up, it's only 2 reps, but you might want to correct me on that, but it's something that we can feed with a two-way street, even we can discuss at the council what's happening in the meeting and actually feed through. I think it's important with all these committees to actually talk about what's happening in them amongst all the councillors so that we can increase the capacity and the knowledge. But, have you got anything you'd like to add?
It's not a committee I know a ton about, the Regional Transport Committee.
Through you, Your Worship, that committee's been an ongoing committee for many years and feeds up into the Regional Land Transport Plan. But to Councillor Byers' point, there's certainly an opportunity to feed in this council's challenges and opportunities, and I would suggest that in particular over the next 6 to 9 months through the development of the activity management planning process, there'll be much discussion with council in the first instance around the particular challenges for Southland District and its transportation network and needs, and that committee is a really useful landing point for a lot of those issues to ensure that they find their way into the regional land transport plan as priorities and onwards up into the national land transport plan. So that's I guess the golden thread: Southland District Council activity management plans, the regional land transport plan, and into the national land transport plan.
There's also a government policy statement coming up to do with transport, and it's given the nature of our 5,000 kilometres of roading, it's important that we actually contribute to that from our council, not just through that committee as well. So yeah, very valid point. Are you happy with your answer?
Yeah, but it's my concern is that there's some fairly strong personalities on that committee, and the appetite for changing the way that things are done is perhaps not there.
So you're concerned around the strong personalities from our council going on there, or
the committee itself?
Yeah, no, it's like I say, I think it's important that we feed through in both directions from the committee, so it's not just running in isolation. I think that'll be the key to actually, and if there is the ability to take councillors along to meetings, then that will certainly be as well. Happy.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Rob, I'm happy to move. And Julie, are you happy to continue on as the Citizens Advice Bureau?
Yes, it's a great committee, but if anybody else wants to join them, I'm happy to share the work done.
Are you happy to move recommendations? Oh, I might just go through them all individually just to make sure that we're so A through to C are your standard ones. So D, the finance, that's the 3 committees there, the finance and assurance, the district licensing, which will be advised at a later report, the Ojai Railway Fund, and then we've got the governance structure committees, finance and assurance, district licensing, Ojai Railway Fund, Riverton Harbour Subcommittee, Te Anau Basin Matuku 5 Rivers Water Supply, the Stewart Island Rakiura Visitor Levy Subcommittee, the WasteNet Advisory Group, the Regional Heritage Joint Committee, Civil Defence Emergency Management Group, the Regional Land Transport Joint Committee, and the Great South Joint Shareholder Committee. And also noting that we can establish additional committees later on, and like I said before, we can change this as we need to. And also that the Mayor has decided to exercise his power under Section 41A of the Local Government Act to appoint the Chair of the Finance and Assurance Committee as Bruce Robson. I've just got a question actually on H, on the date of the 28th of February 2026. Going outside of the original boundary, was there a reason for it?
Through your worship, that was in discussions with our Chief Financial Officer. It would just allow, if the Finance and Insurance Committee is re-established next year, a bit of time for an investigation into the most suitable candidate for that role next time, to investigate other potential candidates if that was Council's wish at the time.
Yes, thank you. So the appointments to those committees: Finance and Insurance, Bruce Robertson, like I just said, District Licensing to be confirmed in the subsequent report, Ohio Railway Fund, myself, Councillors Chamberlain and Boparai, Riverton Harbour Subcommittee, Councillor Byers, Matuku and Five Rivers, Water Supplies, Councillors Wilson and O'Brien, Stewart Island Rakiota Visitor Levy, Councillors Keast as chairperson, Councillor Spraggan and Bruce Robertson. Wastenet Advisory Group, myself and Deputy Mayor Menzies. Regional Heritage Joint Committee, Deputy Mayor Menzies and Councillor Duffy. Civil Defence Emergency Management Group, myself and Deputy Mayor Menzies as the alternate. The Regional Land Transport Joint Committee, Deputy Mayor Menzies and myself as the alternate. And the Joint Shareholder Committee for Great South, it's myself. Some of them it's actually stipulated, but it needs to be the Mayor and the Deputy as well. So, yeah, looking like it's heavily weighed. Age Concern, staff member Kelly Tagg. Around the Mountain Cycle Trail Trust, Deputy Mayor Menzies to carry on in that role. Creative Communities, Councillor Ruttencourt to carry on in that role. 4 Districts Community Counselling Centre, Councillor Keast. Pioneer Women's Memorial Trust, Councillor Keast. Southland Indoor Leisure Centre Charitable Trust, Councillor Fraser. Southland Medical Foundation, myself. The Regional Heritage and Building and Preservation Trust, Councillor Duffy. The Rakiota Trust, that's Fran McKillisick. Apologies for that. I'll get that right one day. McKillisick. Te Raupu Taio, it's myself and Councillor Menzies and Duffy as alternates. Tuatapere Amenities Trust, Councillor Boparai. Waiau Working Party, Councillor Chamberlain. Whakamana Te Waituna Trust, Councillors Duffy and Keast.
Through your worship,
Apologise.
did you want to add an additional row into that?
So we'll add a additional into L for Councillor Keast to be on the Citizens Advice. And then just noting in point M that with Councillor Keast being the chair of the Rakiora Visitor Levy Policy, it's because the previous triennium it was the chair of the Community Strategy, so it's inconsistent with the policy until that's changed. And that we approve the terms of reference and delegations made to committees, subcommittees and joint committees in a subsequent report also presented at this meeting. So that was quite a mouthful. So we got through it all. So is everyone, so would you like to move?
Worship, sorry. We had a discussion a week ago around about potentially adding to this list for the Waiau Trust, the River Trust, and whether or not, well, I believe that the former Councillor Harper was representing the council on that trust. Are we any further ahead with
we're also, for some of these committees, we're looking at how they operate in the future and the sort of, like I said before, the fluidity of this list, so we can make changes going forward. So at the moment, I've got Councillor Chamberlain on there, but depending on the needs of the committees, we might be able to make some further changes down the line if you're happy with that.
And is that specifically with those stakeholders and shareholders with that Waiau River Trust, ECNZ, Fish and Game, DOC, landowners.
Because ex-councillor Harvey, was saying that they were only meeting sort of once a year, and they were looking at, so it's how these sort of groups work going forwards. There may be different needs, and we can make changes as we see fit.
Yes, just regarding this, and apologies for my late arrival. Southland Regional Heritage Building and Preservation Trust, we've normally had an alternate on that as well. I know they are quite likely to wind up within the next 12 months, but it might be wise to have an alternate.
Is there any appetite for anyone to be the alternate on that? Councillor Runcorn? So we happy to move A through to N, Councillor Runcorn? Sorry, Councillor Wilson.
And E, we've got the Yarnell Basin was listed, but sorry.
So Councillor Granny?
Yeah, so you've got on page 34 that states the Yarnell Basin Water Supply Subcommittee, but it doesn't actually list it.
No, because that doesn't actually have a council
Okay.
appointee on it. It's the elections are done inside the community. And I think the previous Councillor Kramer was on there through the community rather than through council.
Okay, thank you.
If I may again, Your Worship, and it's not about the appointments, to do with Regional Heritage Committee, I noticed in the agenda, which I haven't now got, but that it's been stated that the administration of that will move to ICC. I was involved in a meeting of the advisory committee that last Friday, and there is some concern about that, and I think that would be a topic for some further discussion.
That used to be administered by Great South, didn't it?
Exactly, yes, and that degree of independence, I think, was valuable.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Councillor Wilson?
No, sorry, that was the Tiana.
Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just about the chairman of the Finance Committee having an appointment that extends beyond the triennium, I'm wondering if that's actually necessary, and perhaps, given that all the other committees stop and you have a fresh start from there, I wonder if that would it's a little bit unnecessary to have that committee being to all the others.
Mr. Chair, the reason why it was put into a February date was because if you were looking for the appointment of external member, then you would have to go through maybe a process to appoint that position, which would take a couple of months, and it was to allow that committee to still function while that occurred. But that may change, but I'm just giving you the background to actually why that was done to February.
That committee could still function, couldn't it, with
And that's over to the decision. All I'm saying is that's the reason why we had it in the past, was just to allow for the committee to continue until the decision is made on the appointment and also for the recruitment. So, how he wishes to proceed.
Councillor King?
Just in support of that extended timeframe, because I feel that the alternate or the external contributions from the external person add great value to that committee, and so to be without them and what might be on, we don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, if I just think it gives some continuity while it's establishes itself. Ongoing knowledge could potentially be
Through you, Your Worship, I'd also support that, knowing that this is where we're at currently in the and that recruitment generally ceases through that December-January timeframe. I think to be able to actually find the appropriate candidate in that length of time.
Councillor Sprague?
Yeah, I fully support it also. We've taken a similar step on the island with our electrical supply authority. We've got a little subcommittee of a couple of staff, myself and two of our ex-board members, working on the future of our power supply through to at least the end of February, because we could see that there was going to be a 2 or 3 month period when there was no one, and it was to get a continuation, and I think it's important on this committee as well.
So I guess the only other question around that is if the future council and that triennium decided not to have a finance and assurance committee, where would that leave that position with it still being in place until February?
So through your worship, I'd anticipate in terms of the contract that Mr Robertson would have, that if the Finance and Insurance Committee wasn't reinstated in the subsequent triennium, that his role would cease. Would that be correct, Ms Rob?
Through you, your worship. I don't know if it's as formal as that. But I'm sure that the services of Mr Robertson could be used in other ways to assist, even if it wasn't quite like that.
Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Byers?
Oh, well, obviously I've got some concerns over some of the direction of that committee, but yeah, I guess.
The consensus seems to be fairly comfortable, so, yeah. Any further questions? So Councillor Ruddenclaw has moved A through to N with a couple of adjustments. Would someone like to second Councillor Greenie? Are there any further discussion? Any questions on that? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? I declare it carried. Right, our next report is 7.2, the terms of reference and delegations for the governance structure, which is page 45 of the agenda, with the recommendations on 46. So I'll hand back over to Lonnie.
The purpose of this report is to present the delegations manual to Council, and it's proposed that Council adopt the manual. So Council's had a manual that outlines all of its delegations, and it's been in place since 2019. So the delegations menu helps Council to operate efficiently and effectively, allowing Council to concentrate on strategic matters, and it empowers other entities, the Chief Executive and staff to have particular powers and responsibilities. The manual also provides a practical mechanism that enables decisions to be made at an appropriate level. Having one single document for delegations makes it easy to identify the delegations that are in place, and it makes them clear and easy to find. The Delegations Manual provides for specific delegations relating to exercising powers and functions concerning finance, council operations, regulatory functions, and other specific statutory responsibilities devolved to council through legislation. Under the Local Government Act, council has a wide discretion to determine the extent it delegates matters to other entities and to community boards. A review of the manual has been completed and changes are marked up in the manual attached to the report. Amendments have been made to implement the proposed governance structure, and as a result of discussions with other local councils, updates are also proposed to the joint committees. This report also suggests that wording outlining the chair of the Stewart Island Rakura Visitor Levy Allocation Subcommittee be amended. Proposed changes to the manual also include the way delegations are made to staff. These are to make it as clear as possible that Resource Management Act delegations are only being given by council. Changes are also proposed to the community board delegations, and the nature of these changes is described in the report. The manual outlines that the Chief Executive can make changes and updates to staff delegations recorded in the manual, but that changes to governance delegations must be made by Council. Staff are recommending that Council proceed and adopt the manual presented with this report. This would give effect to the governance structure, and Council needs to establish terms of reference and give delegations to do that. It is possible that staff may present a report to Council in the new year, incorporating any additional committees that the Mayor decides to establish, if that's the case, to clarify financial delegations and to update delegations to the Riverton Harbour Subcommittee. Obviously, the manual covers a very broad range of activities and responsibilities, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions you may have on this matter. And just the recommendations for this particular item are on page 46 of the agenda.
Thank you. Are there any questions? That manual was the reason why the agenda was quite thick too. Quite a lot of work gone into amending it. No questions? Would someone like to move the recommendations A to E? Sorry, Councillor King, sorry.
Thank you, Worship. Just through the decisions made under delegations, there'll be some, how are they actually reported to council? Do we have a formal requirement for some areas to let us know what we've decided.
Yeah, would answer that one.
Just thinking there's various, through you, Your Worship, there's various reporting lines, and obviously they're all decisions are recorded on the various agenda, in the meeting minutes, but not all decisions are reported back. Did you have anything more? Is there any other, can we elaborate on this more, Cameron? Or?
I don't really have a very, I don't have a specific answer. Most of the decisions are actually coming through council, well, in the case that an exceptional case where I was exercising a delegation that I would ordinarily have put through council, I will generally report that by the report. I suppose we operate on the basis of caution and exercise our delegations frequently and only if we have to. So the kind of situation would be if something urgent happened between a council meeting and the GONA requirements means that the procedural process for setting up the meeting means that we just can't wait. But those situations don't come up very often. It's certainly our preference for elected members to make decisions.
I think you're satisfied with the answer. Yeah. Any further questions? Oh, would someone like to move the recommendations A through to E? And with E noticing that appointment of Councillor Keast going in line with and updating that policy for the final government structure to be determined. Councillor Ranclaw, Councillor Fraser. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Right, so we'll move on to 7.3, which is the schedule of meetings for the remainder of this year and through till April 23. It's on page 227 of the agenda with recommendations on 228.
This is just a simple report, just to approve the meeting dates up to the 5th of April. There's a couple of, there's 3 Finance and Assurance Committee meetings and the remainder of Council. And they're all to be held in the Council chamber unless indicated otherwise. So the venues for 8 March and 5 April yet to be sorted out because they're likely to be in the district.
So one of the notes in there is that we're intending to have at least, and at least is the key word, two meetings out in the district. So there may be more. So that was in point here for the recommendations.
So that's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions around those times? Councillor Menzies?
Thank you. Just a question around the supporting facilities to have the or resources to have the meetings out in the area, wherever that may be. Have we invested in those resources, or have we got a good idea about what we need to purchase to make those effective, and are they going to be available through to the public to come in and move them forward?
Thank you. I don't think we've specifically invested in new resources to enable that. We did run a council meeting in Te Anau at the end of last term, which to the best of my knowledge was able to be live streamed. There is some cost associated with going on the road, but obviously it's important to be out there, so finding a way to make it work is.
I think we can, when we do our first one, we can have a good look at what is needed, and then. But we have proven, like that, you just said that we can make it work with that last meeting we had in Te Anau. So.
Thank you, Worship, and I'll just add to that there's sufficient room with the facilities to hold the meeting comfortably.
It's something we can probably actually discuss and work out what we need, and then come up with basically a list of how to get that done. Now, did you want to add the location of those as well?
And D, I've just slipped in to be held in the council chamber at 20 Dawn Street, Invercargill, unless indicated otherwise.
Are there any further questions? Well, there's no.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, just on that, having the meeting out in the countryside and space issue, I think every little town has got a hall that would be perfectly adequate for a meeting, so I don't think space will be an issue.
I think there's just also like acoustic issues and that sort of thing too, to make sure that we get right so that people can hear us properly and that everything does work. Councillor Wilson, did you have a question?
Yeah, just checking that these dates would all have the ability for video link if required.
One thing we do have to take into consideration going out in the district is to make sure we've got a good mobile phone connection, so we can hook into, make sure we've got that so we can have a mobile Wi-Fi system set up. We still do have a few dark spots in the district, I've discovered.
What's the satellite? I think Councillor
I could bring my dish if we needed to.
So there should be no black spot.
The house, but you can take it with you. That would be fine. Just leave my husband without any technological ability for the day, but he
will do him good, won't it? Outside.
Right. And just another
Bringing a dish is different to bringing a plate.
Just another point to note is the 9:30 start time as well, which aligns with Councillor Spraggan being able to fly in on the day and not have to come the day before. So, but anything, like I said before, anything with this, if it's not working well, we can change it, and I think that's a key point. There's no point in flogging a dead horse over the dry end, and things aren't working. Right from the committee structure, right through the timing of the meetings. I think we need to keep it.
Through you, Your Worship, I'd certainly appreciate dates that go out as far as possible, just in terms of other commitments. That would just help with planning.
Yeah, I think we can quite easily go out for the rest of the year at least by the next meeting, and then give you that ability to plan.
Thank you, Bishop. I support the intent to go out into our communities, into our areas to have these meetings, and just associated with that, it will be helpful, I think, to have or let the community know well ahead of time, so if there's interest in there, they're able to physically attend.
I think given if we've got a specific item in the agenda that's relevant to a specific community, that'll be a good time to go into that area. Cool. Any further questions? Someone like to move A through to F? Councillor Menzies, seconder, Councillor O'Brien. So just with addition with the location on B. All in favour? Please say aye. Anyone against? Carried. Right. Our next report is 7.4, the Alcohol Control Bylaw, deliberations and adoption. So that is on page 231. Look at that, we're halfway through. With the recommendations on 232. We've got Chris Rout, attendance to this item. I'll hand over to you, Chris.
Thank you and good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. Yes, I'm Chris Rout and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst in the Strategy and Policy team. The purpose of this report is to provide information and present options to Council in order to make decisions on the draft Alcohol Control Bylaw and present the draft bylaw for adoption. While I take the report as read, I appreciate that for some councillors this is the first bylaw they will be considering, so an overview of the Alcohol Control Bylaw status and the process being undertaken may be helpful. The current bylaw will automatically lapse on 9 December 2022. In order for an Alcohol Control Bylaw to continue past this date, Council needs to adopt a replacement bylaw. Preliminary engagement on the Alcohol Control Bylaw was commenced with stakeholders in late 2021. In August this year, Council adopted and released a statement of proposal, which included the draft bylaw for public consultation. Council received written feedback from 3 submitters, none of who wished to speak at hearings. These submissions are included with attachment A of this report. Submissions support the continuation of an alcohol control bylaw and re-establishing the sole alcohol-free area within Te Anau Township. The draft bylaw includes minor changes from the current bylaw and also includes an additional minor change made since undertaking consultation to include to include updated aerial imagery in the schedule. Council is not required to have an alcohol control bylaw. However, if the bylaw lapses without a replacement, Council will need to be able to evidence a high level of crime and disorder related to alcohol consumption to re-establish a new bylaw. We have now reached the final stages of the bylaw making process, and today staff are recommending Council adopts the draft bylaw presented in the report. If adopted, the provisions outlined within the draft bylaw will become operative on 9 December when the current bylaw lapses. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I will leave this with you to deliberate before Your Worship will take you through the recommendations for consideration.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have any questions from councillors? Councillor Fraser?
Kind of a procedural question. Is there any issues with the legality of a new council deciding when previous council has heard the submissions?
I don't know the answer for it.
Through Your Worship, we actually haven't heard submissions, so there was no hearings held beforehand. So the submissions are presented with this report.
Any further questions? Councillor Keast?
Thank you, Worship. The question around the Tianel skate park that was raised in one of the submissions. I'm right in looking at the area that is designated alcohol-free. Is the skate park within that area, or is it not?
Through Your Worship, it's within the area of darkness prohibition within the bylaw. So that's half an hour after darkness and half an hour before dawn. So police statistics show that there haven't been any recorded incidents in that area to justify expanding that to a 24-hour ban.
Through Your Worship, I think to just add to that, there was it was incidents that are alcohol related as opposed to incidents per se in the skate park. So whilst there might have been the odd incident, it didn't have a connection to alcohol. So I'd also just like to add that the previous Southland Community Board have actually discussed this, and also Chairperson Holmes has discussed this with the existing Southland Community Board as well.
And they're all on board?
They all understand that whilst there might be a desire to look at places like the skate park, that from a procedural point of view, the police data, as has been stated in the report, just doesn't warrant actually being able to make significant changes.
Yes, I think that the fact that it is covered in the Hours of Darkness is probably key, because nothing good happens after 12 o'clock, really. The alcohol's involved. I think that covers off that point. Thank you.
And through you, Your Worship, there was a bit of a discussion around vandalism, particularly with the new toilets that are located fairly close to the skate park, and again, just not the level to actually warrant necessarily making a change, which might be unfortunate, but
yeah, it's a shame.
There was significant vandalism after those new toilets were opened. I think it's from a staffing perspective. I haven't heard anything recently, so hopefully that's settled down.
Yeah, let's hope that it settles.
Those people that were responsible might have left town.
Yeah, it's the silly season coming up. Let's hope that everyone respects all of the good facilities that we have in our communities. Any further questions? Right, so we've got recommendations A through to M, which is a bit of a depending on which one we adopt today. So I am happy to move from the chair that we adopt JI or 1, adopting the draft bylaw. Do I have a seconder? Sorry.
Yeah, so you're going to move the recommendations with J1.
Yeah.
So you need a seconder for that.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Sorry, Councillor Greenlee. So that mitigates M, doesn't it, if we go with J?
Yes. J1 and K and L.
So is there anyone got a different view on any of those? Everyone happy? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got 7.5, the District Initiatives Fund allocations on page 259 with recommendations on 261. Welcome, Catherine Howie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good morning, councillors. So the purpose of this report is for Council to allocate the September 2022 round of the District Initiatives Fund. So for this round we have received 9 applications with the total amount available for distribution is 65,754. So this is over 2 rounds, so the next round being March next year. So I'll just quickly go through each of the applications. First is from Loss and Grief Support Trust Southland. Assistance for operational costs, they're requesting $10,000. Number 2, Southland Life Education, again for operational costs, and they're requesting $7,500. Citizens Advice Bureau, operational costs and request of $5,000. The fourth one is Parent to Parent Southland for their outreach program, and they've requested $5,000. The next one is Surfing for Farmers. That is assistance towards costs associated with their Surfing Farmers initiative, which is held in Riverton, Collett Bay and Curio Bay, and they are requesting $3,000. The Waikaia Trails Trust making a request of $50,000 towards their Forest Trails mountain bike project. The Northern Southland Community Resource Centre Charitable Trust requesting $1,950 towards their community programs. Riverton Baths requesting $15,000 towards replacing the children's platform at the pool. And the last one is the Plunkett Southland requesting $7,439 towards various costs, injury prevention resources, on operational costs in various centres around the district. So I'd just like to make a couple of points with some of the applications. So several organisations prior to 1 July 2021 used to always receive a grant from Southland District Council for the long-term plan process. So these organisations with Loss and Grief Support Trust, Southland Life Education, Citizens Advice, Southern REAP, Gore Counselling and various St John's organisations. So from 1st of July 2021 they were asked to now apply to this fund for any grants that they previously received from council. So the 3 of those organisations have put in an application for this round. So typically they will be asking for organisational costs. Sometimes it's towards other community programs. So yeah, those are the 3 that have applied for this round. You may have noticed that the Citizens Advice Bureau in their application asked for sort of a funding partnership with SDC for $5,000 for at least 3 years. So I think if we were to make that kind of agreement, it would need to go through a different process, not through this fund. The Riverton Baths, their request was reasonably high considering the amount of money that we've got to give away, and either myself or one of my colleagues will definitely be in contact with them about other funding options for their request. So they didn't actually have anything else in their application about other organisations that they might have applied to. And then the last note was the Plunkett application. You may have noticed that they had a lot of other funding organisations that they had noted that they've applied to or received grant funds. So those applications go towards their full operational costs. So they've just, for this fund, they're just asking for those specific things that they listed in their application. So I have made the recommendations in the report, but you're of course free to discuss each one and change or decline or do anything. So I'll just have let you answer any questions, but you can free to discuss it.
Just before we go to the questions, I just want to just double check for any conflict of interest with anyone. I understand Councillor Keast has already noted her one for citizens' advice. Councillor Wilson.
The Waikaia Trails Trust has got every line with the Ardlossa Community Board, and I have joined in on Zoom call with the trust to see what the project's up to. I don't know if that's a conflict of interest.
Well, given that you haven't got a pecuniary interest in it and that you're acting in your role as a councillor, in my opinion, it's up to you whether you want to declare it or not, but in my opinion, and it's a good opportunity for the room to decide as well if people see that there is a conflict there. But yeah, I guess with our roles as councillors, we are active in the community amongst things as well. So it's, there is a point. Would you like to add anything to that, Chief Executive? Or?
No, Your Worship, I think you've summed it up well.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're comfortable, I'm certainly comfortable with that. Are there any questions for Councillor Menzies?
Your Worship, I think there's an inherent tension in these applications, isn't it, from organisations that require or requesting this funding on an ongoing basis each year in order to be able to provide the services they have, and to also enable new applications from other bodies within our areas. And I think was it close to 40,000 in terms of applications here?
So recommendations?
Yeah, just 40,000 that you're giving out, which leaves about 25,000 for the second round, which adds to the complexity because we don't know what's going to come in March. So we're actually allocating more than 50% of the funds this time round, which also means that we need to be confident that those organisations in our area are aware of this. So it's more a comment than anything else, and I'm sure you're managing as well. But as we continue to fund those organisations that have a dependency on us to provide that, to keep providing the service, it may not always be possible for us to do that, as well as support new initiatives.
Yeah. And I guess through Your Worship, the difficulty with funding is you never know what is going to come in the first round or the second round, so you're always kind of playing a guessing game as to have I left enough for the second round, and you may only get one or two applications and have a lot left over, but yeah, it's just if we had a crystal ball it would be a lot easier.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting as well, the last round there was only 2 applicants, so it swings and roundabouts as well. Councillor Chamberlain.
Just a question through you, Rob. How does the money come to be in this trust? Where does it come from? Is it a set amount every time, or what dictates the amount of money that's in?
It's an annual amount through the long-term plan that it's basically rated for. And,
it's a district rate. Yeah.
Councillor Vapor.
Yeah, I was just, it's a comment again. I was wondering, do we pay any sort of attention when you're recommending these amounts to what these particular organisations may have already received in the past that has given on their decision?
Taken into consideration, yeah.
Right. So we are making sure we're not, others are getting a...
Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just query the Riverton pool one. I think there's quite a precedent about that. There's pools all over Southland that we're funding in their own local communities. I know in Waihopai Toitoi we rate and fund 5 pools there, and they have these exact same sorts of needs from time to time. I think the point about the holiday homes doesn't really mean much to me because they're all paying rates, and it's no different to what the Te Anau pool or the number of other places would issues that they would have. And I just wonder if it's wise at a district level. While I've got every support for pools, I just wonder if it's wise to embark on that.
Through you, Your Worship. I did have a question about that when it came in as well, and because we do have quite a few pools in the area, and they were adamant that because they were used for the Western swimming sports and things like that, they were adamant that they felt that they had that district or that at least 2 community board area benefit. And we have funded other pools before through this fund for similar reasons. So, yeah, that was why I kept it in there.
Yeah, well, there's a number of pools that are used by a wider area. So I'm just.
But do you think it should be more on the local?
Well, I would think that, yes.
Your Worship, I have a few concerns really about some of these applications, because I don't see that whilst they do cover 2 board areas, they do not, they don't look like they're applying to both boards for their initiative, the local initiative fund. The Northern Southland Development Fund would be one that they're often here asking. They've been at this level asking, and really the 2 boards that they've got there probably could easily contribute that. I don't see that it actually gives the District Initiative Fund, I don't feel that they cover, whilst we did say it was 2 boards, it's not really covering a bigger area than those 2 boards, really. Although they're saying 3 boards in there, so because they said people with Mariti as well, so there would be no reason in that case why they couldn't apply to the Mariti. And so, I also have great concerns about the Plunkett application, because I think it's the same thing there. They've centralised all the funds that the locals had, and now they're asking us to fund those, where my understanding was that the local groups were told that they could have they would need to apply to Plunkett to get the funds back, and that them coming to us is, I'm just concerned about that, because I do know that the local Tokanui, or the Tokanui Plunkett, had applied to the Waihapai Toitoi Community Board Fund, and so it's and again with the Riverton Baths one, they have a lot of cash sitting there, and I didn't read anything in there that it was tagged for any other reason to, that it was there for a purpose. And it looked to me like through the community board rate, they were getting something like $38,000 already. So it's, I think that the idea of it being, of this funding then being available to everyone across Southland gives more of a brief to me than what a lot of these are more very localised, and they could apply to 3 boards rather than just coming to here.
I think it's a hard one, because we've said as long as you're covering at least 2 community board areas, sometimes it might make more sense to them to just put in one application. In fact, they know they're covering several board areas. We have marketed the fund like that, so they're probably partially going on staff advice to do that at times, where it might feel better or make more sense to, if they know they're going to be in 3 areas, then they'll apply to this fund rather than do 3 separate applications. And some of those community board funds, not all, but some of them have very little funds to divvy out, so they might make more sense to come here.
I think as well, just talking to the Northern Southland Community Resource Centre Charitable Trust one, because they do cover that sort of Dipton area as well, and covering those 3 boards, it'll probably be difficult to apply to one board, because then they get from that board saying, well, they're actually covering more than our area, and with those smaller size funds, it'll probably be quite hard to justify one board.
And they may also be applying to those funds for a different program that they're doing, so they're trying to get funds from as many places as they can, because they're struggling so much to.
I see that, but I just feel that, well, likes of the Plunkett one, we're being asked to fund cleaning and heating, and that, and my understanding would be that should come through from their national coordinated approach that they have. That's not specifically for running those individual.
The Plunkett funding person who submitted the application did make a comment to me that they don't receive any government funding for community projects, or the type of thing that they've applied for here. So,
But in their application, they've got for cleaning, heating.
yeah, they have
Electricity on there
too.
And I don't think that doesn't have any place here, I don't feel.
Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, thank you, Catherine. I think you've done a good job. It's a bit difficult. And when you're taking money from the ratepayer and then distributing it back out to the community. In the old days, if a community organisation wanted to raise funds, they would go out there and collect cones and put them in a bag or sweep out do things for the community and create this connection with their community as they're raising the funds. But here we're taking the money from the ratepayers, many who can't really afford more rates at the moment, and distributing it according to how we see fit around this table. So I think if you were to consider the big picture of what's happening here, you might have second thoughts
On what?
on whether we should be rating for this at all.
Well, that's a discussion around LTP time. So at the moment, we're working with the facilities that we've got, and then so we've got to focus on the task at hand. But that is something you can raise during the long-term plan as to how much or whether we sort of do this going forwards. But yeah, I mean, at the moment, we need to look at the distribution that we have in front of us. Councillor O'Brien?
Through Your Worship, I'd just like to look at a historical precedent with examples around the investment into the cycling industry in Southland, and I know that there is a real push for this. And I've got a question around the Waikaia Trails Trust, who is looking for $10,000. Now, I'm aware that the overall cost of that project is going to be around 1.3 million. And I would like to have some pretty robust validation around that and some timelines around the return on that investment for the community. Not only for the Waikaia Trails Trust, but for investment into cycling in Southland in general. Now, I'm an advocate for it, but I think we need to get down to some brass tacks. And I think that the Around the Mountains cycle trail is an example of what can be done well and sometimes what cannot be done so well. And I mean, I know that we're talking about, the allocation of funds to different organisations, but, that's a big one, $1.35 million into that trust. And I think that the trust needs to adopt a huge level of self-responsibility.
Yeah, and I can speak from my experience with our LASA board and that trust last training and over time, and Matt Moore as well. But it's they certainly are doing quite a diligent approach to how they do it, and they've got a staged development as well over that whole project. So the $1.3 million is actually staged over multiple stages, starting with a pump track in the Waikaia community. So it's quite a diligently done process. But I hear your point on the wider cycling strategy across. There's the Field and Trails Trust, and there's a whole raft of cycling opportunities happening, and you've got to have an oversight of the whole lot as well.
And Your Worship, some timelines. Do we have some timelines for the Waikaia Trails Trust at all? And what other infrastructure will support just trails themselves?
I mean, that conversation is probably wider than what we're looking at the moment for this funding allocation, and there was some stuff in there in the application. That's probably a discussion to have outside of this process, but definitely worth having. Councillor Wilson.
I can speak for my engagement with the trust, so that seeing themselves as a district initiative, they have stepped aside from applications for community partnership funding in order to let other groups in the community contest for that smaller funding opportunity. And as far as timeline, they're navigating MOUs and LTOs at the moment with council, so it's very much charging ahead, and investment is large, but very staged out, like you say.
Thank you,
Worship. Maybe it's just from the discussion this morning, and given this process has been in place now for 3 years, where these organisations have moved on from grants to this application through this, and I wonder if perhaps when we look at the terms of reference there, particularly when we look at the title District Initiatives Fund, because we've actually got bodies relying on this for their ongoing operational funds from now in an ongoing way forever. So how do we encourage the initiatives within our district to be able to be explored? And again, in a way that relates to Councillor O'Brien's comment that there needs to be kind of robustness behind that to ensure that once they have the initiative up and going, that they're able to continue independently.
Initially, when this fund was set up, like we had a couple of rounds before those organisations started applying for their what they previously just received every year. So initially it was set up as a district initiatives fund, and now it's sort of morphed slightly to accommodate those organisations that had just always received a grant from council. So yeah, the original purpose has sort of changed slightly.
Which is also about community wellbeing and etc. as well. So it's just it may be timely just to have that discussion with everyone in mind and seeing what's occurring and where we're going in the future.
Would you like to add that to the motions that we actually address the terms of reference in a future meeting? Or do you want to leave that till the sort of long-term plan?
I'm happy to leave that to the long-term plan and have that discussion rather than
Yeah, I'd just like to endorse the comments there because under the present terms of reference, Stewart Island Rakura can't apply.
True.
Because anything on the island will be only for one board. So we're rated, but we're excluded.
Very good point.
But the island does have, seems to be fairly good at getting into other funds.
So, but if there was a project that was being running Stewart Island, Winton, Tiana, and someone was doing something across those, that could be applied for.
But normally we don't get that.
Yeah, geography probably.
Yes.
I think there has been one. I can't remember it.
Any further questions?
I'd like to see that the Loss and Grief Support Trust actually do receive their full amount, and how we managed to reallocate things today to perhaps ensure that they do get their $10,000 because they do valuable work and go out to their communities, out in our communities.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of discussion around the likes of the Riverton Baths and the Plunkett. So are we wanting to amend any of those amounts? And with Councillor Keith's recommendation that we increase loss and grief, is there an appetite to Councillor Ruttencourt?
Could we go through them one by one?
Yep, certainly can. Yeah.
I would endorse the loss and grief as well. I've got concerns around the Riverton Baths. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the Reti Community Board, but we've got pools in our own area, and I think if something came to our community initiative fund, that they potentially would not fund the Riverton Baths. And yeah, I'd like to see them one by one too. We can put a lot of work into this.
Yeah, that's a good. So if we move A through to D, and then we can go E one by one. So would someone like to move A through to D? The Fraser. And the seconder. And then E will go through one by one. So
D.
So yeah, all in favour of A to D?
Aye.
Anyone against?
What is D actually saying?
So D is saying
receives applications.
Receives. You've got to go. Sorry.
Okay, all in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Right, we'll move on to E and we'll go through those one by one. So the first one being the Loss and Grief Support Trust Southland. So their staff recommendation is 7.5, and Councillor Keith has suggested that we pay them the full, is it 10,000? So is there an appetite for that?
Well, through you, Worship, I would just wonder if it would be worth actually going back to the Riverton and Plunkett ones, or we go through them individually and see if we want to adjust those ones, given there's been some discussion on them. Just noted in the Riverton Bars trading accounts, it does have a community board rates contribution, and wondered if there were any reserves in there to actually contribute to this project.
I guess my interpretation of the application is that because they use by people outside of the area in the holiday time, that they're sort of trying to access a wider scope. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, yeah.
And we've funded other ports around the district as well, so I don't know.
I guess it's, sorry, Catherine.
Just the query on the other polls that we have funded in the last 3 years through the district's elective fund. What were they?
Off the top of my head, I know the Dipton pool received funding. I think it was for swimming programs and maybe some upgrading of their facilities. I think it may have been about $3,000 from memory.
From in the last 3 years.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, the question, if we start on the Riverton Bars one, are we comfortable with $3,000 given that it's sort of it's kind of grey into the area, but is there anything you'd like to add to that, Kath? With,
no, I think we've discussed it enough.
So the question being the surplus funds that they actually have, are they actually tagged for anything? Is there another project that they're I didn't see it in the application. Well, I think they've got 150,000.
They all require.
Yeah, I think
it's like a system. You've got to redo something.
So that's what I'm asking. If it's, what's their program? Have they got management in that they're?
Yeah, they have mentioned enhancements to the pool, including painting of the pool, things like that, new pool covers.
Capital investment in pools is quite high, so look, they're probably prudent to keep reasonable size reserves there. I mean, one thing that we could do, depending on the timing, is we could refer any of these others to the future round and ask for more information if we're comfortable doing that.
And as I mentioned before, it's also would be my suggestion to them is to have a bit more of a robust funding plan in place for this item, because there are other organisations that they can apply to. So maybe it's deferring them to the next round, but coming back with a funding plan and other organisations that they've applied to.
You could do the same for loss and grief. There's no reason they can't come back for the next round.
That's true, but yeah,
Through you, Worship, I think it's probably worth actually looking at timeframes on some of these applications as well. Some of them are kind of generic. They need the funds for operational costs. If you do look at the Riverton Bass here, and you flip that one on its head, I believe that Graham Lane comes and does his swimming workshops over that Christmas or holiday period. And then you look at Surfing for Farmers, that's clearly going to be a summer activity as opposed to a winter one. So, I think there's some elements of this where we actually consider when funds might be needed as opposed to are they going to be put into a general pool of money. Your Life Education Trust, generally those buses are out in March, April, so I think that's worth looking at.
So what's the consensus for the Riverton Bars if we start on that one? Where do we want to go? Do we want to adjust the amount? Do we want to suggest the next round? Are we happy with the $3,000?
Yeah, maintain consistency.
Bearing in mind, the precedent that we potentially set with any action that we're taking now.
I'm happy to leave it in as it is based on previous allocations, but we draw that in the future discussion around what the fund is going to be used
for. So in terms of reference discussion. Yeah. Councillor Keys.
Yeah, sorry to come back again, but that is, we run the risk of actually setting a precedent for something that we haven't thought of. And I know that for our pools that get access, the Waihopai Toi Toi Community Board rate, they come and present to the board with their plan, their 10-year asset management plan and what they have got coming up, you know, to even get access into the rate. And so, yeah, I would really want assurance that they have a plan for how they're going to fund the stuff that's coming up. Because to me, if they're starting, they need this to run the courses that are happening over Christmas.
Well, I mean, that's part of the value of the way that some of the community boards do it, having the applicants present to have it's hard now when we've got the application form to actually ask questions of it inside this meeting space, but.
You could make it subject to submission of maintenance plan and funding plan for the, remainder of the funds required.
Yeah, that's something that I sort of feel with a lot of these, is that there's no the maintenance aspect. Have they actually costed out the painting and all this type of thing to show that they are going to be short of money in the long term? Or is it just that they see a fund here and will apply for it?
And it's difficult for us to make those assumptions here because we don't actually know.
So through your worship, if we kind of, it sounds like we're all on the same page. I think what everyone's talking about is that these district initiatives actually need to have sound, robust business plans.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of what we're saying, and they need to factor in timelines, and they need to factor in inevitable changes throughout those timelines on all aspects. It doesn't matter which one we're talking about. They all, it should be almost like a basic template for anything. It's a type of business plan.
Which is potentially amending the application process, isn't it? Which will come back to.
Yeah, potentially, and you'd still look at each application. I mean, you necessarily need a full business plan, depending on the type of application that comes
Absolutely,
in.
Yeah.
So in lines of moving this forward, where are we sitting on Riverton Bars? We're happy with that?
Well, propose a
reduction.
But if we gave them $1,500, it's about, what was that?
18,000.
15,000 was the cost, so that would be the.
Well, we'll leave that in there for now. We'll have a look at the other ones, and we can see if we've got a shortfall or so with the blanket one, the other one that was so are you suggesting, as the case, that we reduce their funding or we don't fund them at all?
I think that it needs further discussion and hold until we sort of work out where the actual need is, and if those local initiatives funds would be more applicable for the application.
Through your worship, I could suggest that you take out the operational. I mean, what's my recommendation was 4,000. You could just take the program costs, and take out the the operational factor if you think that's not appropriate. So if I add up those costs.
You can do that for all of those applications. Remove any funding for ongoing operational costs and just fund the capital. So Councillor Menzies was talking about the initiative. It's supposed to be supporting initiatives.
Although some of them are basically operational by the nature of the organisation. So yeah, it'd be very hard to put that criteria on if it's funding with the likes of some of those.
So those specific costs without operational comes to 4,439, and my recommendation was 4. So I don't know if you want to talk to Brand that
for the blanket.
And I can certainly work with them in applying to individual boards for the operational costs.
Then your recommendation would be just over 2 grand if you proportionately reduce that.
My recommendation would be to keep it as it is that falls into, yeah.
Because that isn't actually covering the operation.
On the entire,
With the TAD? With the TAD?
No, I think I would just liaise with them to work with applying to individual community boards for specific operational costs.
So, yeah. Yeah, put that in as part of that. So are we happy with that for the Plunkett? Councillor Keys? Happy-ish? No?
I'm not excited, but
Not
still.
wildly excited.
Are we accepting that? So the Riverton Baths, are we happy to keep that at 3,000 for now, with looking into terms of reference for these sorts of things going forward?
Can I just add with the Riverton Bars, I'm kind of conscious, in my mind, this is about a safety aspect for children as well, and I'm aware of a recent pool incident, so that's, I guess, influencing my.
Three. I'll move next to the loss and grief. So Councillor Keith has suggested that we take that up to their full. So I guess we could do that and take out of the future funds if we wanted to actually do that and leave everyone else as is. But is there an appetite to support Councillor Keith's recommendation?
So loss and grief probably pick up quite an amount of other funding. So do we know, what level that is? I guess not a lot of it comes from the district. It could be ILT and.
Community Trust South.
Yeah.
Community Trust funding listed here in the application. And yeah, a lot of fundraising and their own funds.
Present in the district.
Yeah.
So is that, do we support extending that to 10 or do we want to leave it at 7.5?
Leave it.
I'd support it.
So Darren second. So we'll go all in favour.
We'll go through the whole shebang and then we'll come back.
Gotcha, yeah.
All the bits and pieces.
Thank you. So Southland Life Education, sorry.
Can I just clarify that these organisations can apply twice in a year or can only apply once?
I would say they usually could only apply. Actually, I don't think there's no specific criteria that says they can't apply. So the last time the top 3 applied was this time last year.
Okay, thank you.
So the Life Education Trust, $4,000. Everyone happy with that? Citizens Advice Bureau, $3,000. Happy with that? Parent to Parent, $3,000. Surfing for Farmers, 2.5. Wakai Trails Trust, 10,000. Northern Southland Community Resource Centre Charitable Trust, 1950. So everyone seems to be happy. That's the only one that was different was the loss and grief. So that was moved by, seconded by Councillor Fraser to increase that to 10. So that would involve, if we did that, shortening or limiting the next round's funding by 2,500. So, sorry, just bear with me for a sec. It's quite hard to give out money, isn't it?
It's hard to apply as well.
So one,
It's not.
yeah. Yeah, I think you want to, because Noreen's got the tag on it.
So we do E1 as a separate motion? Or
Get a move and seconder for everything and then Councillor Case can come in as a member.
okay, sorry,
I
Councillor
just want to comment in regard to surfing for farmers, and Councillor Kirsten and I had a discussion around it last night. We've got some extremely big players that put their names to this Surfing for Farmers. One of them being Rubber League, which is England. New Zealand wide, they put $10,000 New Zealand wide, and they named two Surfing for Farmers along with Balance and their discussion last night was we're not putting name to this if we are funding Surfing for Farmers in Southland. Southland District Council's logo involved in it.
That's something I can request. I think that's a fair comment. Yeah.
Tag on it.
Yeah, put a tag on that one. Councillor Fraser?
Do we have, I mean, a number of applications do ask the question, how we acknowledge this funding? Is that a question we ask? And is that something
Not currently, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Just a thought.
Because it is good to show that we actually are supporting these things, especially those initiatives.
We should all be heading down to Surfing for Farmers, getting your wetsuits on.
Or alternatively, you could just stand above it. Meet and greet people.
Surfing farmers. No, that's me, huh?
No, it's anybody.
We possibly cause a bit of loss and grief.
Right, so we'll step through these one by one. So we've got a mover and a seconder for the first one. So for the second one, can we have a mover and a seconder for the Life Education Trust for $4,000?
Yep.
I'd do it as, I'd get a mover and seconder for everything, and then we'll come in with councillor Keith's an amendment and deal with it.
Thank you.
Because we've got some tags and bits and pieces and some bobs.
Bits and bobs.
Yep, yep.
Yep, right. I think we're getting this fast. So we'll do a mover and a seconder for the whole lot. Any of these, Councillor Boparai.
Okay.
And then we're going to do a sub
Yep,
one. For
and then, so
So
any amendments to, and then take them all separately because we have to manage some conflicts of interest.
So the first amendment we've got is for loss and grief to go to $10,000. That was moved by Councillor Keith, seconded by Councillor Fraser. Are there any further amendments that people would like to make? And then we're just noting Councillor Keith's conflict of interest for the...
That's further down, so we'll get to that.
Cool.
So put the amendment.
So I'll put the amendment. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? So that was noting $10,000 for loss and grief. That is carried.
Okay, go down to 2.
And number 2, $4,000 Life Education Trust. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? Carried. Citizens Advice Bureau, $3,000. All in favour?
You're not right, but you're coming back.
Yeah, and Julie's not allowed to say she's in favour. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? Carried. Parent to parent, Julie, welcome back to the table. $3,000. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Surfing for farmers, and we're going to add a condition there that they talk to the comms team to use our logo and advertise the fact that we've helped them out. $2,500. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Waikaia Trails Trust, $10,000. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Northern Southland Community Resource Centre Charitable Trust, $1,950. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Riverton Baths, $3,000. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Royal New Zealand Plunket Trust, $4,000. And that had a tag too, didn't it?
Tag officers to work with applicant to approach community boards for operational costs.
All in favour of that, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against?
I did actually think about
That's a good idea. So in line with Councillor Menzies' recommendation, we could put a new F in there that we revisit the terms of reference at the long-term plan time, so we actually get that motion put through. So I imagine that Councillor Menzies would like to move that. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Graney. All in favour? Anyone against? Carried. And that might be a good time to segue into the morning tea after that robust discussion. Back online. Cool. So we'll carry on with 7.6, which is a bit more handing out money. Sport New Zealand Rural Travel Fund allocations, September 2022 round. And that's on page 265 of the agenda with recommendations on 266. So I'll hand back over to Kath. Again, if there's any conflict of interest, just make sure you declare them.
Thank you, Your Worship. Hello again. Hopefully this allocation should be a little bit easier than the last one. So for anyone who's not aware, the Rural Travel Fund is funding that all the local rural authorities receive from Sport New Zealand. The aim of the fund is to try and remove cost barriers for young people getting involved in regular weekly sports competitions. So schools and clubs are eligible to apply for their students or members who are travelling to regular sports competitions every week. So it's not for travel to special tournaments or anything like that, it's for regular sports competitions. The funding is allocated on a formula based on the number of kilometres that they've estimated that they've travelled. So yeah, my recommendations are based on that formula, so happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Kath. Just a question from me, just for a start. Is this advertised to all of the schools?
Yeah, it is advertised and through all of our usual channels. Actually, another comment that I will make is that I have noticed in the last couple of rounds the application numbers have really ramped up, whether that is just through good advertising, word of mouth, or increased fuel costs, I don't know. It's made this round a little bit difficult to allocate because I had to reduce the amount that I'd usually give out because otherwise there'd just be nothing left for the next round, and the amount we receive from Sport New Zealand is fixed until 2024. So there's no movement on the amount that we receive, and usually we have a bit of carryover from the previous financial year, but we had $100 this year, I think. So it made it a little bit hard.
Yeah, those rising fuel costs will certainly be, yeah. Councillor Menzies.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. You probably answered my question because it was around the increasing interest and the increasing fuel cost. Whether we through to 2024, whether we're able to write to the funder and say, is there a possibility of increasing this funding amount given the increase in fuel?
Yeah, absolutely, and that has been on my mind, whether they are looking at that. I mean, we do send them reconciliation every year about how much we've spent and all that kind of thing, so I'm guessing that they probably will be looking at that and whether they can increase the funding.
You need a request for them to reconsider, and we'd have to show the when that's occurring.
Are these all the applicants that we received for this fund, or is there some that have been?
Any further questions? Sorry, Councillor Duffy.
I was just going to say, I think it's a very robust process, and I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Do we have a second of those recommendations? Councillor Chamberlain. And we've got a potential, have you put a new G down there?
I'm thinking that we need maybe a new G to request that staff communicate with Sport New Zealand to increase the Southland District due to increased fuel cost.
Yeah,
so do you want to do that at the end of the current term, or do you want to do that now? Now. Okay.
Through you, Your Worship, there was one that came from the Fieldland area with being able to encompass students that were not necessarily involved in team sports, but they were involved in sport and had to travel significantly. So whilst I understand the terms of reference does currently limit those children, I wondered if at the same time, if we were going to write to Sport New Zealand, whether perhaps through a school, that those children could actually be included as well.
Is that?
I think they potentially could already be included. I'm not too sure what specific type of sports you're talking about, but maybe they could already be included with a school or the club
It's sort of more
apply.
the individual sports
Oh,
that I'm thinking
So you're
of.
referring to like mum and dad are taking them rather than the school
They're
being
taking them to
Athletics, just like
um, trampolining or
But would they belong to a trampolining club that could apply?
they would be belonging to a club, but the club is not necessarily in the the club could be outside of the area.
Like me taking my kids skiing
Yeah.
and saying they're involved in skiing, and therefore I want some support, or whatever sport.
Just exploring that mechanism to allow individual sports, because it seems to me that most of these are actually it's very team sport oriented.
Yeah, it is. I would, if you do come across anybody like that, I would just encourage them just to get in touch with me, and maybe we can work out a loophole or somehow that we can encapsulate that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think Stewart Island's been through that.
Yes.
Yeah, because we got actually recommended that to come in onto this fund, the fund that we applied for.
Yeah, so the school has
And so
applied.
the school and got the school to get in and put it in, yeah. But it's children that are actually not in team sports because there's not enough kids to.
Yeah.
But they join teams when they get to the other side.
So yeah, there's potentially ways around that.
If I may ask, is 1,000, I'm not sure what the formula is, but is 1,000 the upper limit regardless of the...
It's usually 1,500 for anything over 7,000 Ks.
Okay.
But I just had to drop it down because I just
have an upper limit regardless of the kilometres travelled. Right.
And in the past, you've probably been able to reach the upper limit for all of them. Yeah. So this is a change in the. So Councillor Chamberlain's moved that with that new G. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Ruddenford? Is there any further discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Once again.
I think, sorry, that G, Fiona, I think you might be needing to, it might be seek, is it you're looking right there instead of C? Wife will leave.
Right, I'll move on to 7.7 now, the financial report for the period ended 31st of October 2022 on page 273 with recommendations on 274. And welcome Joni now to the table.
Good day, Your Worship, members of Council. I'm presenting the financial report for the period ending 31st of October 2022. The main purpose of this report is to provide Council with a financial overview of our results for the 4 months ending 31st of October. But on this occasion, we'd like to, in addition, inform Council that as at the 31st of October, we were in breach of our investment and liability management policy, but that this has been rectified and we are under the 10 million cap again. We're also requesting the approval of the carry forward of 3 additional budget items from the 2021 to the 2022-23 21-22 to the 22-23 financial year, and these were omitted from the list that was approved by Council on the 21st of September. Overall income and expenditure are all tracking below projection, and the key variances are discussed in more detail in the attachment to this report, and I am happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? You might be getting off light. No questions? Speak now. Oh, Councillor Chamberlain, yeah.
Not sure I didn't see it. Where does the council sit? I mean, when I do my budget at home, I have an opening balance, expenditure and income, and a closing balance. Where does council, where does that, where are we going to finish the year? Are we going to be in positive or negative or?
So if you refer to the cash flow, that's just on that financial page. I'm sorry, I'm just going to scroll down there. That might be what you're looking for. I've just got a finder. So that's on page 292. Yeah. So that's the actual. What we probably should do is actually, I'm not sure why we don't, actually have the budgeted cash flow. So we need to grab the budgeted cash flow in regards to that. I'll just have a look, just a moment. I especially prepared this just for you this morning. And the worst thing is wading through the pages to find the page that you want. So just bear with me. Has anyone else got any questions while I'm waiting?
Breach of the policy? 10 million?
As at that
When
day,
did that happen? How long a period before we detected it?
a couple of days.
So the $10 million was a council initiated limit, and that 10 million was just trying to recognise that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So there wasn't any sort of penalty or anything in regards to it, and it is good practice. And unfortunately at the time, and it's shown a weakness in our systems, that one of the key person who was looking after our treasury functions was ill. So it was sort of shared around the team and they just hadn't realised. So it was definitely something that we do want to improve in that. So now I've just got to go back far enough so I can read it. So our cash equivalents at the beginning of the year were 94, and we're looking for cash equivalents at the end of the year of 265, and we're looking for total borrowings of around about 20 million. So that's an increase of about 4. About 2. An extra 2 million will probably be looking to borrow sometime soon.
So it's borrowing 2 million just
for cash flow operations.
Yeah. So we're sort of spending over and above what we earn.
Well, we are, because if you think about it, our capital program that we've got, we don't fund fully our capital program because we try to share those costs against the generations who are getting the benefit from it. So right now we've got I think it's $16.8 million worth of loans with LG&Z, and that's purely cash flow needs, just to meet those ongoing capital commitments.
So was that LGFA or
LGFA, yeah. Did I do it again? Oh, it's always the 2 initials at the start that stop me.
Thank you. We should I note that the CSA costs with the reduction in fuel prices is good news. Where does that leave us with the end of year amount, and are we receiving, or do we have any traction with around addressing the issue?
Do you remember what they were projecting for CASAs? I'm thinking 400, 500.
Through you, Your Worship, I remember it in the figure in terms of the residual reserve amount,
yes.
Which is in relation to fuel, it will be approximately 1.2, but there are some additional capital works that is working its way through the Stewart Island Community Board in the upcoming meeting next week, which will have that figure closer to 950, as I understand it, for this financial year.
I can come back.
Traction on addressing the overall related.
Through you, Your Worship, we're also looking and have been workshopping at the Stewart Island Community Board how we might at least part way through fees and charges, adjusting the pricing mechanisms, and we're also looking at the short, medium, long term options as far as future provision of electricity generation. But as yet, no absolutes at this point.
Get an update at a later time.
Absolutely would.
On page 285, environmental services, below projection, the main variance relates to resource management costs, which are $300,000 less than anticipated due to vacancies. So the vacancies in the organisation now, and then we're looking to recruit in regard to the national policy statement for Indigenous biodiversity on top. So have we got a lack of staff in that area now, and we're going to need more. So it's probably not the right person, but I noted that when I was reading the minutes.
Through you, Your Worship, just
speaking generally, Councillor Ruddingclaw, you may or may not recall through the last LTP workshopping and budget allocation process, we had identified that this legislation was coming. However, we weren't, we didn't have at that point a defined date, so we allocated costs to accommodate additional staff to manage the legislation when it landed, and we've only just recently, in the last month, had some of that legislation land. So we're in the process now of assessing the implications from a staffing and resourcing perspective, and we'll be similarly interrogating the implications of the legislation and looking to engage with our communities and the sector in particular around what the implications of that legislation means. That's not to say, though, just a minor caveat around that the resources and expertise will be readily available in the market in the region. However, we'll do what we can, of course, to meet our legislative responsibilities and communicate with our communities in doing so.
Councillor Chamberlain?
I'm just sort of trying to get my head around the sort of budget deficit of the 2 million, but because when we're sort of campaigning, I mean, what was very clear to us is that we don't need an increase in rate. So, I mean, is the council happy that we're at $2 million in red, and how are we going to cope that? Or is the plan going forward that we will get back into positive territory, or?
So, through your worship, so Councillor Chamberlain, you're just referring to the 2 million we were talking about before?
Yeah.
Yep. Once again, that's long-term borrowings. That's like going out and saying, I'm going to buy a house and I take a mortgage out for that house, and that sits there as debt. And that's what we're talking about with that $2 million. It's not operational costs that we're funding. It's actually capital expenditure. So I can't imagine us going out tomorrow and wanting to rate an extra $2 million to pay those capital projects back. What we're trying to do is just meet the ongoing commitments, the principal and the interest on there.
Yeah, debt is one of those mechanisms that we can use to decrease that desire, well, not desire, decrease the need to rate for it, and to rate for the whole 2 million. You can fund that 2 million over 30 years, or you can fund that 2 million in 1 year, and then that's going to be 4% in rates as opposed to probably 0.2% in rates over that amount of time.
I guess we're increasing our debt, aren't we?
Because as what happens, over time, assets need replacing. And so that debt does occur. And I mean, it's natural for it to happen. And it's important, though, that the future generations are paying for that, because the thing is operational costs you want to meet on an annual basis. You absolutely want to cover those. But capital-wise, you're saying, well, let's make sure that we're meeting the annual cost of consuming that asset, which is why we try to fund depreciation. We go slowly recovering that, and then that money is used to equally repay the debt.
And at the time of the long-term plan, that's when we sort of go through and weigh everything up as to the levels of service and the funding mechanisms for how we do everything as well. So there's levers that we can pull during that time.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that our debt is slowly increasing. So when does that start coming down?
I'd have to come back to you on that. But knowing, it comes back over a certain point of time. It's like anything. It depends what your asset recycle period is. And then, of course, it comes back. I think the key is that we can meet our principal and interest repayments from our rates. That's the key question. If we've got an asset, we have to maintain it.
Oh, no, I get that, but I'm just concerned that the debt.
Yes, absolutely, and it is, as Ben says, it's absolutely one of those conversations that about our new plan.
Still living within our means and repaying our debt and bringing that down.
So Councillor Byers and Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm encouraged by Councillor Chamberlain's concerns around the debt levels of this organisation. They are increasing quite fast, and I think that long-term plan process is where we need to look very closely at a lot of these expenses that we're incurring. And it's not necessarily just big expenses, it's a lot of small ones that seem to add up. But hopefully there's an appetite this year or in this process to be pretty strict around the spending. And the funds on call, eight something $million, next to 0%, 1.25. Is there an ability to get more interest on those by?
So through your investment policy states what I can do with that, and it says that I have to have low risk, and that low risk represents bank deposits, and those bank deposits depends on when I need that cash flow. So we go to the banks and we ask for it, and I can only go to certain banks because of their credit rating. So the lowest I can go to, I think, is an AA. I don't go lower than an AA. So I can't actually go to SBS at this point in time, and simply it is what the banks are prepared to give us interest on at that time. Now, I will say that the interest rates we've tended to get in the past have been lower than mum and dad going in and investing, and they say that's a lot to do with their, because in the banks now they've got criteria around where they need to invest their funds, and yeah, so our rates are lower, but that's the best I can do.
Thank you, Anne. I do get a bit confused about our investment policy. You're talking about low risk, and yet at the same time, we're looking at investing in the share market. So here we are, we've got an interest rate of next to 0. But if perhaps not all of that 8 million needs to be sitting on call, we could perhaps almost double it if we could forecast ahead 3 months.
You'll see that actually there are a variety of terms. So we'll generally look to see where our cash flows are needing to be. So we try to round them up with our 20th of the month creditor payments. And as you're been involved in councillor buyers, you're part of the decision making in regards to the investment policy. So that's a council decision. I'm just here to enforce that policy. The decision itself was made around this table.
Okay, well, you mentioned a variety of terms, but according to this, it's $8 million sitting in funds on call, interest rate 1.35%. Well, it doesn't seem like an awful lot of variety.
So I think have we got it down below? No, we haven't. Yep, so they must have needed those funds then for the creditors' payments, because otherwise they would have had a mixed term in there. But basically we get our instalment of rates, and we invest it for a 3-month period. So we either do a 1, a 2 or a 3, and we try to spread it across that time, depending on where we foresee those payments are going to be needed. And of course that depends on the time of the year, because if it's in winter, then we can probably put it out a bit longer. But if it's going to be in the summer months, we want to keep it short, because we're going to most likely have to meet roading payments and things like that. So the guys will have done their assessment. So you will see those vary over time.
I guess the key messaging in that too is the fact that the staff are working to the policies that we set here at this table as well, and that sort of feeds into that investment policy that you've talked about that will be getting addressed later on as to the where, the when and the how, but it's all driven by a policy, so yeah. Councillor Duffy?
I was just going to make the point that for many years we prided ourselves on having no debt, but over that time our bridging program fell way behind, and our roading rehabilitations weren't keeping up with the need to keep the rotation going, and that ended up costing us big time to try and get out of that hole. So I think having some debt to cover long-term projects is actually a wise way to go, as long as the debt's manageable.
And that was the flavour of the last long-term plan, was we're not going to kick the can down the road anymore, and we're going to have to
address these things. Yeah.
And false economy too.
Through your worship, so we're all on the same page once again with regards to whether you're a mum and dad investor or with the council with regards to the cost of money and the variables and how we recover that debt. Are we aligning that with, say, our council assets? As an example, on page 146, under property, we have the authority to enter into new leases for council properties on the following basis: that the value of the property not be more than $200,000. Does that align with the timelines or where we are at with regards to meeting those requirements? Like, are these adjusted? And why is there a limit of $200,000 on a council asset, assuming that some of our assets are worth far more than that?
Sorry, councillor, what page were you on?
Page 146.
The particular delegation limits the delegation for the staff member rather than for council's ability to agree or negotiate leases of a longer term on properties at a higher value. It's simply saying that council is prepared to delegate to staff, to officers, the power to negotiate leases no longer than 5 years on a property worth no more than $200,000. All other decisions need to be escalated to council for decision making on the basis that they're worth more, they're longer assets, they're more strategic in nature. So it's not to say council can't, it's just to say that officers can't without council's knowledge, approval, oversight.
On the carry forwards that were missed, can we have some assurance around systems, improvements to the system so that that doesn't happen again? Because I think they're...
Through you, Chair, we do our very best. If you remember the list of carry forwards, actually tracking these things is actually really hard. In that particular instance, it had got onto a carry forward, it had gone onto, I think, an unbudgeted, you're going to have to correct me on this, it got onto an unbudgeted expenditure report that subsequently didn't get onto a master sheet because of the title of the report, and we just had missed it. So that was two of them. Yes. And then what was the other one?
The other one, we didn't carry forward enough.
Oh, we just didn't carry forward enough because we had, what the guys had estimated they needed, hadn't taken, they thought they'd already paid something, and it actually hadn't been paid. So we absolutely, we go through robust processes. So yes, we will continue to do our very best. I just can't promise that we wouldn't come back with the odd one. This is the first time in all the years we've been doing it, I think, that we've done this. So if that gives you any reassurance.
In some ways, yes, but in other ways, it's that there are lots of projects going on, and so having oversight over them all is important so that they don't fall through the cracks. And that's not as a criticism of you as individuals, but the system that we've got must capture all those projects so that and align the costs that have been expended or are proposed, so that we're up to date and on top of that stuff.
I guess the system actually worked to an extent and that were identified at some stage, but yeah, it would have been good if they were.
Sorry, through Rob, just how might be more of a question for Cameron, I suppose, but how much scrutiny is put on council expenditure? How in depth do we make sure that we're efficient in every department and that money's getting spent more as we? Because I am still not going back to the 2 million, but I understand concern that we're perhaps. And I understand that we need to spend money on capital, but is there other areas of the business that we are not scrutinising enough and could be cutting back in other areas?
Through you, Your Worship. Excellent question. I think part of the challenge is recognising the this is a quarterly snapshot of an operating budget within 1 year of a 3-year a 3-year window, and for infrastructure a 30-year window. And within that there is an ebb and flow of all sorts of costs. For example, election costs, they only, theoretically they only happen 1%. We have a responsibility under the Act to operate effectively and efficiently, which we do our best to do. And I think the role of council is, as various reports and things come before you, it's part of that process of being an elected member that says, how do we know that this is the right thing? How's it working? The other assurance that you get on some of that is through the Finance and Assurance Committee, and the fact that the chair has been Deputy Auditor General in a previous life, and brings a fair degree of security to that role as well. But I can hear some of your questions, and some of those will become clearer as the context of how we budget, how we account, how we roll through a snapshot of a 3-year window, and some of the previous questions have actually in effect been around what are the policy settings and then how are we operating within them. It turns out to be quite a complicated mix, and there is a degree of taking a while to recognise what we're looking for. So long answer, but part of the council process, you'll see that actually we
and been a bit green, and I would love to sit down with Anne and sort of get my head around it. It is.
I guess another example that we can look at that's actually a process, I guess, improvement that's happening at the moment is the scoping around a lot of the projects that's happening, and that process getting more refined will inevitably create efficiencies, and that looking down at even at the community board level and working out, if we can get that scoping part right, then the rest of it should fall through. So there are measures being put in place now focusing around that sort of thing. Was there a further question? Oh, you happy with that answer, Councillor Chairman? Any further questions? Right, well, I think I'll split these recommendations up, but I'll move from the chair A through to C. Do I have a seconder for those? Thank you, Councillor Ruttencourt. All in favour? Carried. So then we move on to D. So we're noting and acknowledging that the risks associated with the breach of the investment and liability policy that's been discussed. So is someone happy to move D? Thank you, Councillor Bray. Thank you, Councillor Keast. All in favour? Carried. D, that we approve $10,000 of capital expenditure being carried forward from the 21-22 for the Nightcap School fence to the 22-23 financial year to be funded from the McGregor Park Reserve. Councillor Menzies, seconder, Councillor Duffy. All in favour? Carried. F, approve 11,959 of capital expenditure being carried forward from the 21-22 for the Aridi Hall fence to 22-23 to be funded from a loan over 10 years. Councillor Fraser, Councillor Menzies, all in favour? Carried. G, to approve additional capital expenditure of 35,304 being carried forward for the Te Anau Library refurbishment to be funded by a 10-year loan. Councillor Greenie, seconder, Councillor Duffy, all in favour? Carried. Thank you for that. And I'll now invite the Services and Assets Activity Update reports. Very extensive A3 page. Who's going to speak to this one? Page 297 of the agenda as well.
Through you, Your Worship. Just a question, if I might. Previously, when presenting these reports to the Services and Assets Committee, we've cycled through each of the responsible activity managers rather to present the A3s and respond to any questions. Are you happy for that to be the case?
I think it's a very valuable way to do it. Yeah, thank you.
Your Worship, Councillors. My name's Mark Day. I manage all of the community facilities. Community facilities has quite a number of sub-activities under it. These include community housing, community halls, offices and buildings, open spaces, which you probably refer to as parks and reserves, toilets, water facilities and cemeteries. I will take the report as read. However, I will highlight some of the things in the report that are possibly worth some discussion. In terms of project delivery, we are actually
well ahead of where we should be in terms of delivering projects, especially the TIF projects up in the Manapori-Tiana area. They're coming along really well, and getting some really good feedback from the communities with those new facilities that are being built there. Those were partly funded by MB, so 50% by MB and 50% by council. The projects were in the LTP to be done. However, we've been able to do some additional works in those areas because we've got that funding from MB. In terms of upcoming work, we are now starting to look at the 22-23 capital projects, getting the forward planning and getting the forward work done on those projects, so we're ready to start delivering on the 1st of July next year. This is a process we've been going through probably over the last 3 years to improve how we deliver the capital works projects moving forward. And it's a piece of work that my team does with the other teams across the organisation, especially the project delivery team. Probably something to raise in terms of our contract performance. We look after all the mowing contracts, the gardening contracts, and the office cleaning and toilet cleaning contracts. Our mowing contractors are experiencing some fast grass growth at the moment, and we are getting some RFSs in about the length of the grass. However, they are putting extra mowers on to try and get on top of that. But it's this time of the year. Spring is always an issue when it comes to lawn mowing. We looked at our risk assessment this time round. I lowered the COVID-19 supply issue risk from the previous month. Obviously, we'll have to keep an eye on that now with COVID coming back and doing a third round. So it's something just to keep in mind. However, the impact of COVID on the ability to get materials for our projects is still there. It certainly has an impact on our ability to deliver. We are moving into the next LTP cycle. So these are some of the strategic priorities we have to look at. As part of that, we have to renew and review our activity management plans because they form the basis of what goes into the LTP. We are currently trialling an electronic booking system for our halls to try and streamline the process of booking and invoicing for the use of our halls. We had hoped to have that rolled out by the end of this financial year. However, there are implications through the fees and charges process whereby we have to get the fees and charges aligned prior to being able to roll this right out across the district. So what we're proposing to do is to do that over the next 2 financial years. So come the end of 23-24, we'll have the electronic booking system in place across the district. In terms of budgets, there are some variances there which have been commented in the notes below that. I'm quite happy to take any questions from the councillors.
Just a question for me for a start around the mowing, and you mentioned the RFSs. Is the RFS still the best system to use for people who do have complaints or issues with the mowing?
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's just an encouragement for anyone who does get to actually go through that system, so it is recorded and then it provides the line of approach to.
So through your worship, if there are issues out in the district and you want them dealt with, the simplest way is to put an RFS in. Then we have a record of it and we have to respond to it. Those RFSs may go straight to our contractors or we deal with them there ourselves. But that is the way to get them into the system.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, the RFS is not, well, and you would say Anteno works as well?
Pardon?
The Anteno app works as well?
Yes, it does.
because I'm not having much success with either. I specifically asked for feedback on one of the, a piece of the mowing and I had been approached, so I specifically asked so I could go back to the group and tell them what was happening, and I haven't heard a thing. So, and the antennas that I've put in, nothing's coming back. They were quite good at doing it, but they've no feedback whatsoever.
So as part of the process to feed back to the reporter of...
Through your worship, I have a person that normally ring the person who puts the RFS back in. So I'll follow up on that.
I guess, yeah, it's very important to have that closed loop.
Definitely.
Because I've been promoting the Anteno and the RFS wildly, and I'm sort of thinking, well, saying, yes, I'll get back to you and tell you what's happening, and that's actually not been my experience in the last 2 months. So,
Okay, see if I can endorse that, even though I know that the work that I put the RSM for last week's been done. There's no phone calls. There is supposed to be a
You need to ask for a response. There is a box in the RFS system that you tick to ask for a response. If you don't tick it,
this was a phone call, so
yeah.
I don't believe it's on the Anteno though. I don't think there's
Not on the Anteno, no, just in the RFS.
should come back. They're on the Anteno ones. They should.
As I say, my staff member is generally pretty good at responding to people when they put RFSs in.
Any further questions, Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just around the strategic planning priorities, closed landfill risk assessment, is the Colic Bay landfill part of that assessment?
Through you, Your Worship, sorry, I'll have to get one of the other staff members to answer that. That's not in my portfolio.
Did you want to speak?
Through you, Your Worship, that closed landfills falls within our water and waste activity. I can, though, comment that the closed landfill risk assessment has been completed. Colic Bay was, again, for the third time confirmed as a low risk. And the monitoring, the specific intervention monitoring and testing that we've had with the 4 PSOs established on site have all determined that there is no contaminants either on site or migrating from sites beyond normal levels that would be found in the ground. But however, for the sites that were determined medium or high risk, we're in the process of developing specific landfill management plans, and through the activity workshopping process we'll be providing updates to council around those in the lead up to the next LTP around any potential budgeting implications for specific remedial interventions that will be required moving forward with well across the portfolio of our, I think there's 66 closed landfill sites across the district.
Just through you, Your Worship, just around that Colic Bay landfill, I know you've done some work there, and the contaminants aren't more or greater than would be expected in a landfill of that age. I'm wondering, can we get a bit more information on what it is that is in that landfill? Because what would be expected from a landfill of that age, you know, from the 1950s, 40s, 60s, could potentially be, under that wording, what would be expected, some fairly significant contaminants.
Through you, Your Worship, apologies if I misspoke. It's not that there are the contaminants are comparable to what you would expect for a landfill. The contaminant loading is comparable or commensurate with virgin ground. There is no evidence of migration of any contaminants whatsoever, other than so it's comparable with virgin ground.
Okay, so that sounds better than what
in fact, the contaminant, the water quality was close to what we would expect to find in our drinking water source. So again, it's low risk in that regard. So our focus, energy and efforts is very much on those sites that have been identified as medium or high risk moving forward at this stage. That's not to say that Colic Bay, along with all of our other sites that have been assessed as low risk, won't have a degree of annual monitoring. It's just that the type of intervention and monitoring needs to be more significant and prioritised and focused on those other sites for now.
Thank you, Matt. That's to have a comparison with virgin ground. I didn't read that in that report. It was in there, but it didn't leap out at me like that. But I guess whilst that provides quite a significant level of reassurance, we still don't want it bursting out into the ocean, and it would seem to be a fairly easy fix along there.
Well, that's subjective. I think it's a wider context that whole coastal erosion, climate change effect, and I think Colic Bay is a prime example of something that's constantly evolving and will need constant monitoring, irrespective of. Are there any further council members?
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of questions. You note under contract performance, just they're all running as required level of service apart from Te Anau. So how is that level service being managed? Is it going to be delivered later in the year, or is there an adjustment to contract payment, or how does that?
So in terms of the contract for the cleaning of the fine pluck toilet in Te Anau, the contractor is struggling to get staff.
So is the work being done?
The work is being done, but they are struggling to get staff.
So the work has been done, that's the main thing I was asking. Secondly, just around the risk factors, it's noted on there under COVID-19 supply issues that the store contractors to resolve claims with the latest lockdown. So what lockdown are you referring to, and how many claims are we still working on?
Sorry, Councillor, which ones?
And the risk factors in box reference number 1, COVID-19 supply issues. So in the mitigation actions, it's got contractors to resolve claims with the latest lockdown. So,
through you, Your Worship, that's a carryover from an old report. So that's a matter that needs to be removed. There's no.
That's fine. So can we have that removed next time round? And under box 2, it talks about the works program for 22-23. Said there have already been some projects that will be carried forward. So how many projects have been carried forward to the 23-24 year, and why are they being carried forward?
So what we've identified is that if we look at a financial year and we try and start on the 1st of July and finish in the 30th of June, we aren't in a position to deliver projects. So what we're doing is we're starting to spread them over 2 financial years. So we'll take a portion of the funding and have it in 1 financial year, so we can prepare all the building consents, resource consents, the other consents, archaeological authorities, and get that ready to deliver in the following financial year. So say for instance, as an example, this year we have pushed the actual delivery of some of our toilet projects out to next year because we need to get the resource consents in place, the building consents in place, all that preparation work. And if we try and condense that into 1 year, we end up not delivering. So this is part of the journey we're on, and looking at improving our performance of delivering our capital projects. Hence the reason why we are starting to push some of those projects out. It's not all of the money; it's a portion of the money. So
I understand that, but how is that reflected in the report here? So is it that the works program for those particular projects should be 24, not 22-23, because it looks as though we're not meeting those timeframes?
Through you, Your Worship, I might just add a little bit of additional context to Mark's comments. Traditionally, when we do a forecasting carry forward process, that's a report that deals with a specific financial year. And one of the mistakes that we've made in the past is that we confine our thinking, because we work in singular financial years and we have to report on those singular financial years. We have an annual planning process and we have an annual reporting process, and it's only generally the 3 to 10 year LTP process where we wind up looking at a program of work over an expanded period of time. In recent years, what we've been doing come annual plan, forecasting, annual plan, annual reporting time, is looking at the broader implications of the capital works program, because inevitably things happen in any given year, and every year you might pull some projects forward, you might push some out, you might add some new projects into the mix, and your works program in that year changes. What we've found ourselves doing historically is taking a proportional chunk of that works program and putting it into the next year through a forecasting process. And we've created a larger works program in the next year than we necessarily have the capacity or resources to deliver. But we're not looking at that because we're dealing with this current year. What we've taken the opportunity to do this year through that forecasting and annual plan process is, when we do that carry forward process, we're looking at that works program at the same time and saying to ourselves, well, actually, we had committed to delivering $40 to $45 million worth of work next year. We've just carried forward $5 to $10 million. That is now an unsustainable works program for us to deliver with our resources. So we need to take a broader lens and spread some of that work and reprioritise across a longer period. So that's what that specific comment refers to.
So that all makes sense entirely in terms of an approach. Maybe the report changes and that the projects are carried forward all on track or whatever it is, as opposed to making it look as though we're already not meeting the projected programs. When I'm just reading, it looks like for some reason, and then I was asking the reason why, it's not on track, but in fact it is, but it's a change in approach you're referring to.
Change the comment.
Yeah. But it's all been managed, is what you're saying, which is fine.
I think it's, through you, Your Worship, it is being managed, and we take the opportunity at those milestone points through our reporting processes to look at it across the year and across a multi-year. But there is still an ongoing risk with those changes that occur, and with resource challenges, supply issues, increasing costs, rescoping, additional work being added into the mix, that that risk continues to exist. And we see that both at our forecasting point and then towards the end of the financial year when it comes to that carry forward process. So I think it's still important. Happy to change the mechanism around how we do that and how we articulate that and report it. But I think it is important that as staff we are clear to governance that those changes are likely to have an impact our ability to deliver the committed works program in a given year.
That's what I was expecting your reply to be, that because there were hold up and materials arriving, that's why the projects are carried forward. But then I got the explanation that it's a planned kind of carry forward because you're spreading it over 2 years. So that's what I was trying to understand was behind the comment. So you still have the risks that you're referring to about materials not arriving, which then requires the projects to go through to the next year. But there's also the other practice that you've referred to, Mark, which is entirely understandable. It's just understanding what that risk is and why.
Right.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Chamberlain, Councillor Rattencourt.
Just what's the criteria around, like if your contractors are short of staff and work doesn't get done, does the council get reimbursed for that work that's not done, or is?
We start with, we issue them with a non-compliance notice. And if it doesn't change, then there are consequences in terms of the funding, yes.
So someone is
keeping a process to work through.
Someone is keeping an eye on making sure that what they're contracted to do is actually.
Yes, we have contract managers that manage those contracts.
Through your worship, work that's not completed is not paid for.
Yep.
So the contracts are set up in a way that if that work or that mowing cycle isn't done, it's not instantly paid for. And that's what our contract managers regularly audit to ensure that what is being supposed to be delivered is actually being delivered, and where it isn't, then there'll be a reconciliation. Through obviously when claims are coming and certified.
Thanks for your report, Mark. I'm just a more of a comment, not a question. My questions have been answered. Very positive comments from the Dipton and Winton communities around the Dipton playground. Great to see the gardens being moved as well. It's certainly lifted that whole town, and the John Street toilets are fantastic. The playground in Dipton, I even managed to grab a photo of a councillor on the swing one day. I won't mention who.
I really enjoyed the swing, by the way.
Councillor O'Brien?
This might help to fast track a query or some queries that I've had from, and I've been meaning to talk to Councillor Graney about this. I've had some queries from the people of Manapōuri and Te Anau about the public boat ramp. And it's construction at the moment, and they're a bit concerned because there's no public access to the lake, according to them. I don't know, and I'm just wondering can I pretty much fast track this by asking them to lodge an RFS.
So through your worship, there is access to the lake. An agreement has been made with the Manapōuri Boat Club that the public can use their facility, and we are covering the cost of that while the new ramp is being built. So they use the Manapōuri Boat Club boat ramp.
And through your worship, Tiana also had even though the main boat ramp there is down this beach.
That's fairly well known.
It's very well known because it was widely communicated prior to the fishing competition.
So it would be prudent for me to email this person back and explain to them that
absolutely
actually that there is public access to both Lake Manapōuri and Te Anau. Okay.
Councillor Boparai, then Councillor Chamberlain.
A general comment here is, because I was looking at the budget that we have underspent in open spaces by 57,000. Open spaces, is that what we call parks and reserves now? Has it been rejigged?
Yes, through your worship, yeah. Open spaces refers to parks and reserves, our playgrounds, and all our green spaces. And in terms of the underspend there, what we're doing, in the process of doing, is to try and mitigate that underspend. Is we're going out with a contract for our playground maintenance. Previously, it was done on an ad hoc basis, but we're preparing a contract that will go out to tender, hopefully prior to Christmas, so that we will just be managing a contract, and that work will be getting done on a regular basis.
Just to follow on, how do we manage a project brief in this space? When I'm looking at the parks and reserves, it says that the key outcomes are to celebrate our natural spaces, protect, conserve, increase awareness, cultural connectedness, and so on. How do we manage something which is defined like this? This is pretty vague a term when you talk of deliverables. And I would be concerned, especially from a point of fiscal prudence, that.
So in terms of our open spaces, we've been on a journey since I took over this role 3 years ago to bring our open spaces up to a standard and actually activate them. So we have a relationship with Active Southland now where we support a role there that is out in the communities doing activations in our open spaces. And this is all part and parcel of the open spaces strategy that we have. So there's been a big commitment from council. They put $5.5 million in the budget which we will be coming to council with an update on how we're going to spend that money and what you're going to get for it after Christmas. So it's been a work in progress. We've certainly made inroads into that plan. Now we're starting to see some traction in terms of delivering that particular.
Well, it certainly seems to me from what is written here that the brief of simply managing the assets, we seem to have gone a bit further into what we actually want, the deliverables here, activation of spaces. Like, this is a very vast term.
Well, it's definitely long term. Like, we've got 155 reserves across the district. We've got a massive area that we have to look after, and it's actually making sure that we meet the requirements of the strategy, and actually deliver what we said we're going to deliver when council signed off on that budget. And we can't do that alone. We haven't got the resources to do it alone, hence the reason why we're partnering with the likes of Active Southland.
And it kind of feeds off the full wellbeing part of the Local Government Act as well, and into those sorts of that sort of territory. Any further questions, Councillor Chamberlain?
Just carrying on from Councillor O'Brien's question, just regarding the timing of the work on the Te Anau boat ramp, given that it was done prior to Labour weekend when it was Te Anau's biggest boating weekend. Asking about the timing of it, could it have been done during the winter when not so much use on the lake, I guess?
We weren't in a position to do that when the lake levels are low because we were still waiting on the resource consent. If we'd had the resource consent to be able to do it, we would have done it when the lake levels were low.
Yep. So how long before it's finished? Question.
Through your worship, all the works in Te Anau is finished as far as I'm aware, and we only have Manapori left to complete. Just for the new councillors' information, that project was 50% funded by TIF, by MB as well. So we weren't allowed to physically start works until we had or engage contractors until such time that we actually had a resource consents in place as well. So we're sort of hamstrung in regards to ability to start and carry out that process. We tried to work as closely as we could with the community board in regards to the timing and try to provide, as we have in Manapori, alternative access as we could. It's never quite perfect, but staff are always well and truly engaging with the community in regards to when we do.
I've had a lot of questions and people ask me why has it been done, and I said, well, actually I can't answer that. But.
So, yeah, through you, Your Worship, that there's a lot of consultation being done by staff with the community board, and a lot of it is actually juggling timing between Labour weekend and Christmas, and it actually was preferable to have everything ready by Christmas, and if it had been rather than Labour weekend, so hence things being done sooner rather than later, because otherwise you'd have been into the whole Christmas period. Previously there have been significant discussions between staff and the board around projects over Christmas. So, for example, last year there was the major water main replacement. That was all actually put right and made good for the Christmas period, so that it didn't impact the operators. So there is significant work that is actually done with council staff to make sure that those types of timeframes aren't impacting business specifically.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question mark around the management of the playgrounds. You mentioned that there's some work being done there. Is that looking for one contractor to do all of the playgrounds?
It will go out to the market and we will see who comes back. So it could be one, it could be multiple.
Through Your Worship, it would seem like that would be a good opportunity to getting local people to manage the playgrounds. There won't be any health and safety aspects there, I would imagine, given that they are fit for children to play in. So
There'll still be health and safety ground, working
Health and safety.
on them, that'll still be a.
don't climb the slide. That would seem to be an opportunity to get locals managing local assets.
Through you, Your Worship, whoever gets that contract needs to be qualified.
Yeah.
So there are standards that they have to meet to be able to do that piece of work. And once again, we always try and use local contractors. It's something that is difficult to do in some cases. However, we endeavour to use local contractors. And then, we ask the key question, what's a local contractor? Is a local contractor the contractor in the town or somebody in the Southland District?
Planet Earth.
Through you, Your Worship, there's specific qualifications that people have to have in order to inspect, audit and maintain playgrounds. So Mark's not referring to health and safety obligations, although they of course exist. It's specific qualifications necessary to obtain in order to be able to inspect, audit and verify and maintain the safety of the playgrounds themselves.
And that's set nationally, not through council.
Exactly, that's not our.
Well, thank you. If the contract is set up in such a way that it has to, the role is to inspect, audit and maintain the playground, then you've automatically ruled out most of the local contractors probably. Whereas if the contract is set up to, well, you could have a Southland wide to inspect and audit, but to maintain, like use a hoe and get some weeds out, surely anyone can do that. So my point is that if you really want to encourage local input, local people managing their local assets, then it really comes down to how that contract is set out at the start.
Your Worship, staff always try to look to use as much local as we can, but we always have the tension between being as efficient and as effective as we can with ratepayers' money and trying to manage multiple contracts versus more contracts that are more condensed. In regards to playgrounds, the reason we're in the place we are now is because there has been a piecemeal approach to auditing and a piecemeal approach to fixing and then you're not getting the same quality and quality and continuity across that work. So what we're looking to try to do is make sure that we've got some better responsibility and better auditing and a better outcome for all of those. That is an operational element. We still have capital replacement of playgrounds and like that. Again, that can actually be a different contract. But in regards to ensuring the health and safety and compliance of playgrounds, we need to have some continuity there.
See, I look at a playground and think that there's a few weeds, and over the weekend I had a hoe and was weeding a playground. So
I guess
maybe
there is the avenue to do stuff locally where we can, and there's definitely an appetite. I think we're all aware of that, and I think it's balancing the two streams of getting it as local as we can and enabling our local contractors to do as much as they can within the realms of the national standards that we have to also make sure are being adhered to. So
I accept, Your Worship, that there's standards to be met, national standards, and that relate to the management or the auditing and so on around the playground. But just to get the weeds, to remove some weeds, or I don't think it'd be that hard to have local people doing it. And I'm just concerned that the way it's getting set up, it's going to preclude local people from managing these playgrounds.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's a lot more to the maintenance of a playground than just doing the weeds. A few years ago, there was a major report came out, and virtually every playground in the Southland District Council was substandard, had items that had to be removed, had to be replaced. And up till then, we had relied on locals to do the repairs, do the maintenance. They weren't happening.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, I'd certainly endorse what Councillor Spraggins just said. I mean, the report that came and was significant, and we had local contractors who weren't qualified actually looking at the maintenance of the playgrounds, and there is a substantial amount of equipment that's now substandard and has left council in the position where there's significant infrastructure costs in relation to our playgrounds and open spaces, which now needs to be addressed. We have to adopt a balanced approach to this, and it is way more. It's way more, and it's quite technical. And that report was quite technical in its approach. It looked at the sizes of chains, the catch things where kids could tug or snag or anything like that. So I would support what Councillor Spraggins just said, and it's support.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, if you incorporate, if the entire management of the playground is in the one contract, then yes, you're going to make it difficult for local people looking after the local assets. But the auditing, for example, and the maintenance, fixing the spring or the toggles or whatever it is, could be separate to managing the weeds or just doing the tidying the garden around it or whatever. We continue to set up these contracts in such a way that the community is precluded from managing their assets. Take the toilets, for example.
I think this discussion is going towards the procurement sort of policy direction, which is probably beyond the scope of this meeting, but it's valid points that you're raising, and I think it's good things to discuss at the time when we're looking at the actual procurement side of things and how we do these contracts. Sorry, Matt.
Through you, Your Worship, I can't stress enough that every single contract we let, every single contract, either capital works or operational, we run through an internal filter and consider is there local contractor resource with the capacity and capability to deliver the works. I can quite unequivocally state it's one of our biggest challenges when we do identify local contractor packages of work and let them to local communities, that the contractors aren't there to deliver the work. It's one of our biggest challenges, and the more we separate and delineate, the harder it is to resource and deliver the work.
I think it's worth mentioning as well the open day that we had for contractors to come in, and that showed the scope of what was out there, and also I guess staff were able to factor in that into the process. Is that correct?
Through you, Your Worship, the feedback we've had from a lot of those even local contractors is they don't want one-off work. They don't want one piece of stuff to fix, that they don't have time for it. Their preference is actually often to have a bigger slice to be able to resource adequately, to ensure they've got staff, to ensure they've got the plant and equipment and the like. So we do have a lot of contractors now who actually have resourced up in that way, the likes of the Te Anau Earthworks and others that have actually are our local contractors that actually work across their district and do a really good job. But a lot of them are not interested in doing one-off little pieces. We really, really struggle to find contractors that suit that. And I agree with what Matt says, we're always looking for avenues to use locals as best we can.
And I guess if we keep that process going and communicating via our community board as well, as new contractors come on board and there's new, it's not a one-off thing. We met with them 2 years ago, and that's it. It's a continuing process as new skills come available. Councillor Taylor.
Look, I probably agree a little bit with Councillor Byers. I mean, I know in our Tuatapere area that, and we talked about it yesterday at our community board meeting, I get what everybody's saying about the playground. I mean, that's another skill level, but I do agree with Don that in Tuatapere, I know there's a couple of retired farmers that would probably happily go around and mow the lawns and do the weeds and do that tidying up because they love their town, they love their community, and they wanted to see it looking spick and span. And I've only been to a couple of community board meetings. That's the theme that's coming through, is the contractors haven't done the lawns or haven't done that or haven't. And Oropoki's looking a lot worse than Tuatapere. But I think if there was some local farmers or retired people that were happy to go and do some of that work, give that community.
I would agree, and I think sometimes to get the community buy-in, things might get a bit more stretched or messier than we would like, but sometimes that just helps bring the community along together, so you have to, at times, go for processes that are not as tidy as you would like them to be.
And as those contracts come up for renewal, because a lot of those contracts have been let for, so, and those are discussions that we can have at the time that those are coming up. So that's,
through your worship, I think this probably enters the realms of community boards. As you say, those discussions should happen with community boards, maybe not to the extent as what we are having now. And I promise I'm not going to ask you guys any more questions today. The world's opening up, New Zealand's opening up, Southland's opening up. You're getting a hell of a lot more visitors coming through. Our infrastructure and our assets are obviously under a fair amount of pressure, and you've got a large portfolio. We've talked about playgrounds and other things. People talk about things like public toilets and so on, which I'm sure is right up there. Just to summarise, what is your biggest challenge with regards to the larger number of people who are going to be coming into our district?
Our biggest challenge, I guess, is getting on top of what we have already. So maintaining the assets that we have already without delivering more assets. Because as soon as we start delivering more assets, that means we've got to maintain more. So, we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years of identifying what assets we have, what condition they're in, and actually trying to put a program in place to upgrade those facilities. So it's across the board. It's right across all of my activities. If you look at water structures, we've just done all the work in Te Anau. We've got the old waterfalls coming up. We have a massive number of assets that we have to manage. And so our focus is maintaining and managing those assets before we even start looking at putting new ones in. That's our focus.
Matt wants to add something, Zabi?
Just to put it really succinctly, scale, cost, resource.
Scale, cost, resource. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned one of those resources was lack of people, which is a challenge that we all face at the moment.
Lack of people, both externally and internally, given the scale and the increase in cost, and just the geographical expanse and breadth of, and that's not just limited to Mark's portfolio. It's across the board. It's no different for Hartley. It's no different for Grant. It's no different for Swindon. Scale, cost, and resource.
So we need to take the opportunity, right, to, under the new legislation coming through with the RMA, as an example, we need to be putting a bit more pressure on central government with regards to maybe some skilled migrant workers coming in to be able to fulfil some of those areas, whether they be internally, in the office or out in the field.
Absolutely, and I think one of the biggest challenges, as it was to the last LTP, is, and I don't envy you guys being around the decision-making table in this regard, is in the upcoming LTP and the activity management planning, sort of balancing of priorities is determining where and how to distribute rates and cost and level of the levels of service discussion is what I'm not very articulately trying to say is going to be a particular challenge in the upcoming LTP. So big, how do you distribute that?
It was hard enough distributing that money this morning for the district initiatives, and it's going to be that one.
Big picture stuff. No, appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Have we given Mark enough time in the
I think you've done it for everyone.
Any questions, Aaron? Councillor Wilson?
Just hopefully one really quick question. Regarding the halls, and the underspend on minor maintenance, what's the mechanism for that type of work to be done on halls for quality assurance? Is that RFS through users of the halls? Or
So in terms of the halls, we allowed a budget of $2,500 per hall for annual wash down, spout and clean, and fly and spider control, and another $2,500 for reactive maintenance. So, say for instance, an example of that was the auger at the Ojai hall broke, and we had to repair that. So it was giving us the ability to have some funding without actually having to go back to the community board, get unbudgeted expenditure to do work. We are putting that together as another contract, so we will have a program maintenance contract across our offices and buildings, community housing and halls, and that will be going out to tender as well. So to mitigate some of these issues that we're having to react to, we will have a program maintenance program in place.
Thought you might be safe, Matt.
Get out. Thank you, Your Worship.
Is it, or?
I promise I'll be quick. Good afternoon, councillors and Your Worship. I thought I would just quickly introduce myself. Some of you I've met before, some I haven't. So I'm Brendan Gray, I'm the Project Delivery Manager. If you were able to make the induction a couple of Sundays ago, my report is somewhat of a regurgitation of a few of those points, and obviously there's some new information in here, but we can take it as read, mostly. I guess just a few points I actually should have set up here, perhaps beside Mark and Matt, because they've pretty much covered probably most of my bullet points at the front there. So I actually won't go into that, but I'll open it up for questions at the end. So obviously the bullet points is just, I guess, a snapshot of where we're at to the end of October. Activity overview is some of the projects that we've managed to completed recently, and obviously what's due to start or what's coming up shortly. Risk register has been updated. Obviously COVID is still in there. There is still an impact on material supplies and labour force, as we've discussed in previous reports. That has been updated, taking those into account. Resources, and obviously resources, there's ebbs and flows within staff and within the project delivery team as we have projects that are coming towards their end as well as projects starting. There's that little pinch point, or there can be the pinch point with regards to resource internally, that is, and so there's just a little bit of managing through those peaks and troughs. Health and safety, obviously we as the project delivery team, whilst projects are being delivered, I guess the due diligence for the health and safety, so that is our approved contractors. We're going out and doing site audits and site safety observations. That's fed back into and through our shed system, and any issues that we find at the time are rectified by the contractor, or so they are followed through. And I guess the current financial status to the end of October is shown there, and then I guess a list of our major projects for 22-23 is also shown there. So it's short and sweet, but I'll open up the floor to any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Ravencourt, Councillor Menzies.
Thanks for your report. Just a question under the current works programs to the end of October. You put approved unbudgeted. You may have discussed this. Of what on Three Waters of 1.5 million. Just for the 2022 to 2023 budget. Can you explain it to me? I'm a little bit lost with that.
Three Waters, sorry.
Three Waters, sorry.
That unbudgeted expenditure will relate to the stimulus funding that came through last year, and was delivered last year. So that will be a proportion of the $13 million of unbudgeted expenditure for the Three Waters stimulus funding. that would have been carried forward into this year or last year and been delivered.
Thank you, Bishop. I imagine that we'll have a report coming to us around the new otter seal deliveries that are going to occur next year. I'm wondering if that report can include a review of the performance of the otter seal that was laid down last term. I took a drive up Dean's Road and I couldn't even find where it was applied. I may have been driving in the wrong area, but I'd be interested to know about the lasting effects, particularly where there's heavy trucks going over that area and their speed may not be within the recommended limits.
Well, Your Worship, that definitely sits more with myself and my team, and yeah, I'll take that on board and report that. I'll also cover off briefly when I present the transport section.
Thank you. So we'll look at that early next year, coming back January, February. Thank you.
Your Worship, another otter seal that's just recently been completed is Fraser's Beach Road in Manapuri, so another good one to keep an eye out or an eye on. I'm imagining there will be a lot of traffic over there during the Christmas break. So to look at Fraser's Beach Road, you would just think it's a gravel road. So until that reaction takes place and the bitumen, I guess, comes to the surface, it just looks like a gravel road at the moment.
Hopefully that's the case with Dean's Road. The second one is just around the environmental section of the report. You talk about the 2022-23 project resource consents identification and early engagement or specialist resource requirements. Could you just explain what you mean by that?
It somewhat goes into what Mark was saying. So basically early on in the piece, figuring out where either resource consent, building consents are required, and then starting working on them early. So we're trying not to delay, project delivery by.
That's good. Thank you. That's clarified.
Councillor Guest.
Thank you, Worship. And the Oliver Island Jetty resource consent has been lodged. Is it any feedback on that currently, or has it disappeared into that system?
No, it is sitting there. We've had a response from Environment South and with some questions and a very large list of what they consider affected parties that we need to negotiate with. It is still journeying through the realms of Environment South.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Just for a bit of council information, we've just spent $24,000 on audio seal outside our house, so I'm sure I'll keep council well up to date.
Perfect. Any further questions? You got it lightly.
Thank you very much.
Morning, afternoon there actually, Your Worship, fellow councillors. Just for an introduction, I'm Grant Isaacs. I'm the manager, strategic manager for 3 wards, water and waste as it is now. We will take the report as read, because I'm sure you've all had a good look at it, but there's a couple of things I'll point out just in the program's report. The Ridsdale wastewater treatment plant upgrade went to tender and it's just being evaluated as we speak for a decision to be made. There was 4 tenders as I understand it, and that's the first one of our first big multi-million-dollar project out this year. So it was good that we got 4 tenders. The other items there I think are pretty self-explanatory. And the strategic planning priorities, there's 3 years operation and maintenance contract closed a couple of weeks ago, or what it is now on the 18th of November. And we got 2 bids and the evaluation process is currently underway. And we obviously want to get to a point in nearing the end of next week to be able to have a preferred contract status prior to Christmas and have a discussion with them that will go into the formal negotiations after Christmas. Other areas there I think are pretty self-explanatory, and including the closed landfill risk assessment. We're updated there. Just on compliance, we're going very well on compliance to date. And health and safety, I always like to talk about health and safety because our contractor has a very good record to date, as you can see by the zeros in the report. So that's very pleasing. I think I'm quite happy to leave it at that and take questions from anybody that's got questions.
Thank you, Worship. Again, just with the COVID-19 supply issues and the risk factors, number one, you've got contractors to resolve claims with the latest September 21 lockdown. So
That's clearly a miss out there from a previous report. And to be fair, I think next time round that red 16 on the COVID supply will drop. We'll reevaluate that. Materials. Pumps and certain pipes is like some of the pumps at the moment are about 4 to 6 months delivery. That's a challenge. Not to be fair. Piping not quite as bad, and most of the sizes we require aren't too bad. Some of the not so normal sizes could be up to 4 to 6 months. That could be a challenge, but I think I'll definitely drop that COVID-19 on the staff and resourcing.
Is it worth discussing the upcoming drought and the measures you're putting in place?
Well, you asked about the biggest challenge before. I put water over summer, particularly around Te Anau, Mossburn and the rural woods. We got, last year was the rain came just at the right time. We were getting close. I think since then we learned a few lessons. We've got a lot at the council now. We've got a lot better, but my team have got a lot better relationship or an established relationship now with Emergency Management Southland and the Lifelines community out there. So we're getting good. I've got a report today on where our, what the forecasting's like. Environment Southland have very good tools to give us where the aquifers and the river levels are. So we'll from now on, particularly now that we're starting to come into summer, we'll be having a lot more conversations with them, being a lot more advanced than last year. We've got a lot more advertising at the moment for water restrictions, and we're also going to put out it's new, as a board up around on our apps and websites, Antenno and that, about where we stand. We'll have a system similar to the fire with level 1, 2, 3, 4, and level 1 will be like level 1 will be around. Well, if you're washing your car or you're doing the garden, do it with the handheld. Don't leave it with unattended and all that. And then as we move through the iterations of the risk, then we'll go out to the community for more conservation of water, etc., etc. So it's always a challenge, and I suppose the challenge for Te Anau is this will be probably the first year post-COVID back to a reality of a lot more visitors, a lot more holiday makers, so that will be interesting.
Mm-hmm. I guess the key is being as proactive as we can and front-footing it rather than waiting to the day that we run out and then go, oh, what are we going to do?
We're actually looking at putting a sign up outside Te Anau. That was one other rivet, and they light the fire sign. So we just comms are doing a bit of work on that at the moment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Grant. Just on that, being proactive and the water management on the south coast last year, generally considered plenty of rain, but I mean the Riverton water supply was getting low too.
Riverton, Mossburn and the Homestead were the challenges.
Yeah, and yet at the same time we have this rain at other times of the year that costs us money in the stormwater. It just seems a little bit strange to me that we don't encourage people to catch that water on the roof, store that for a dry period, wash your cars with it, water the gardens with it. Plants grow better with it.
I think we've answered. I think I've talked about this one before. You're right, and actually, I had I was in a meeting the other day. Actually, there are some good systems out there now for people to go and catch their roof water. And for those things, Bunnings, I understand, have a really good system.
Bunnings.
So walk down to Bunnings, Don. Maybe in Vicargo might not, but you go to Queenstown or Dunedin. There's some good systems now that can be hooked up to your pipes, etc., and used for those very purposes.
Yeah,
whether that becomes a council issue or a individual issue, that's probably not right here.
It's a council issue because we've got to make sure that everyone's got water. So, I mean, it might be worthwhile council taking a position and encouraging thinking around that, because it would save a lot of stress on our stormwater. as well as.
And there are benefits in it, yeah.
But we could be a bit more proactive around that.
Discussion outside of this this thing today, but yeah, definitely worth considering. And I mean, individuals can do that now as well. So it's yeah, and you're advertising the fact in this meeting publicly too. So it's yeah. Any further questions, Councillor Keys?
Thank you. Just under the strategic planning priorities grant, the subdivision land use and development COP, is that design standards review? Something with ICC?
Yeah, we're trying to get a series of standards that are consistent across Southland, really. And I think with the new entity coming in around the Three Waters, it will actually go up a gear and be across New Zealand.
So that's for subdivisions?
That's for any sort of work. So if we're doing eroding work, we're all using the same sumps, same type of standard structures for collecting the sump water and also around our designs for subdivisions and the like.
As long as we're making sure that there's plenty of room for environmentally sound and options in there, rather than it just being one size fits all, it'll be.
It's pretty comprehensive, and we've used other councils' work that's already been done, like Christchurch after the earthquakes has some fairly good information, and Tasman's. We use a bit of Tasman's sort of work because it's a very similar urban rural graphic. So,
any further questions for Grant?
Well, it's probably not really Grant's field, but it just reminds me, talking about water and wastewater, etc., that we have talked before here about our development levy or whatever on new developments to fund future infrastructure growth, and I think it's just something we should keep on the radar.
Yeah, that was discussed at the end of last training, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We should just remind me, there was a report to come back to council on it, wasn't it, at the discussed in August? Was it to come back in September or October?
Through you, Your Worship, you're right, Councillor Menzies, it was discussed, but then the counter was, given that we're in the midst of the Three Waters reform, it's an issue for council only until, I mean, the process, the cost, the consultation of re-implementing or reactivating a development contributions policy, by the time that was undertaken and completed, we'd be a couple of months away from handing that infrastructure and service delivery to a new entity that would have their own nationally established development contributions approach. So it was felt that that would not be a prudent use of council resources given the timing with the Three Waters.
We had a discussion after our meeting. This was around subdivisions, wasn't it, that development?
It was, but that process is being, the development contributions policy and implications is being inherited by the Three Waters.
I'll look it up later, I think.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Byers, did you?
Sorry.
Do we do the next one or do we break? Keep going. We'll keep going on to.
Thank you. Your Worship, Councillors. So yeah, just as my previous colleagues, my name's Hartley. I'm the Transportation Manager. So part of that is obviously roads, bridges, footpaths, and cycle trail, and airport also sort of fall under that transportation. Okay. So I'd like to take the report as being read. Probably just one or two things is that at the moment a lot of our work to date for the year has just been general maintenance, routine activities, as opposed to a lot of capital works. Most of our capital works activities sort of start kicking off from now and run through the summer months. And end up with the bulk of the construction really being January, February, March. I suppose from a planning point of view, or looking to what we're doing from a strategic point of view, just capturing some of those erosion sites, not just coastal erosion, but also river erosion sites, and risk assessing those and looking at what sort of future interventions may be required or how we manage those. That'll also help inform the next discussions going into the next long-term plan. So a bit of that planning work going on now, from now and in the next 12 months. The question, or the point I suppose around the otter seals, you'll see that's covered off in there. So we've received a number of applications for the year. That work's been undertaken, and for some sites we're already seeing effectively that they're being cured. Other sites may still look like gravel, and it'll still be a month or two before they effectively cure. But as mentioned earlier, we'll bring a report back on how last year's sites performed as well as this year's sites, or at least how they've performed to date. So the only other point really is probably from a risk point of view, the budgets and costs. As you're well aware, we've seen reasonably significant costs, not just we're not immune to any of the other costs that anybody else has seen around fuel and food. One of the things, I suppose, from a transportation point of view, some of our activities such as, say, gravel crushing, there's a lot of fuel costs that go into that. And so we see whether that's from the crushing component through to the cartage on the roads, and that does put a lot of pressure, I suppose, on the budgets in terms of how much those costs have gone up in some activities. That's just something to be mindful of. But at the moment, we still, I suppose, working within available budgets that have been agreed. I'll leave it at that and take any questions.
Just an initial question, or probably a clarification, just for lots of the new councillors as well. Like with the mowing, it's quite a heavily raised thing, and roading is another one too, where the public quite often raise concerns. So would your advice be that the RFS system is the best one to use for potholes and grading and that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. RFSs are the easiest way to capture that. Similar to what Mark sort of mentioned, is that goes straight to our well, depending on what the RFS type is, but general maintenance activities will generally go straight to our contractor to respond to. What I would say though is, I'll pick on a pothole as an example, or a gravel road or some corrugations. Doesn't mean we'll necessarily divert the grader to go and address that pothole. We may do an assessment first and also see from a routine activity like grading, how far is that grader away from actually being on that road. So is it planned to be there next week or next month, and then do a bit of assessment and then say, well, okay, if it's not too bad, it's going to be there next week, it can wait, we'll leave it rather than pulling it off its beat, because that then upsets everything else, but also creates inefficiencies and increases cost.
Yeah, having it recorded in that system.
Definitely the way to go.
For you being able to plan properly.
Correct.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Worship. Just an update information really, Hartley. The completion date of the two bridges that are outside, when is the new completion date?
They're under construction at the moment. I got informed this morning for the one bridge, the bridge deck's actually being completed today. So before Christmas is expectation.
Not too far out.
No, they're not too far out.
Completion date. That's good. Thank you. It'd be good to get those finished. Yeah. And thanks, Hartley. The contract that's been awarded on the Gorge Road and Cable Highway, please tell me that that's just this side of Mokatoa.
Yeah, it's the really slippery section that's under speed limit at the moment.
And it's expected.
So we had discussions actually last week into the whole program with the contractor, and they expect to establish before Christmas and do some drainage activities, and then come back after the Christmas New Year break and start doing the actual road construction component of it.
So leading on from the fact that it's gone smooth, is there any, is that only happening in Southland, or is that across the network that phenomena is?
So is so because of the size of our network, I suppose we tend to see it. We will be seeing it more and more, along with the age of our road network. It's made up of the number of resurfacing layers that we've put on. When it eventually gets to a point where it becomes unstable and there's too much bitumen, so then you're left with having to rebuild the road in essence. It's not just limited to districts' roads. A lot of the state highways, particularly around Southland, have been quite evident. State Highway 99, even up towards Lumsden. Some of that work's been driven by those excessive seal layers. It's just an age thing, really. They're built in the 50s, 60s. Every 12 or so years, if you're coming around resurfacing, when you get to about 6 or 7 layers, there's just no more capacity to just resurface. Or you can, but you'll be back every second year, and it's just not economical to do it.
Councillor Ravenclaw, Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Hartley, for your report. My question is around the otter seal. There was an issue on Brookdale Road, Hokanui.
Yep.
And at the time, I don't know, we progressed with it. I was told that they were having logging trucks come across it. Now, how do we, and apparently with otter seal, there shouldn't be anything heavy on it for 3 months. How do we mitigate that with the trucks on our roads and our gravel roads and stock trucks and...
So there's 2 aspects. One being the type of heavy activity and how intense it is. So yes, there can be heavy activity going over it, but one of the things we've done is, I suppose, have those temporary speed limits in place while the surface cures, try and reduce the risk to it. The other one is when we've had applications is actually assessing the sites, particularly for turning activity. That's where it's more susceptible to damage as opposed to running straight across it. In saying that, things like tractors and the makeup of the tyre configuration is something that we pondering with some of the sites where we've seen some issues. Is that has that been a contributing factor, because that's not something we've come across before. So we are working with our supplier on that. Have they seen it elsewhere around the country where it's been applied, or it's just some of that's quite new. We haven't come across it before, so trying to figure that out.
So was that the only issue with otter seal last season, or was there more?
From last season, that's the main site, but we've seen a couple this year where we are seeing some failures where there's been intensification occur just after we've applied the site, such as silage. So yeah, we'll have a look at that. There's still areas that may fail due to underlying pavement issues being too soft. But, yeah.
So one other question, thank you. Where does that fix up dollars lie? Who pays for it? Is it the contractor? Or?
So a combination, depends on what the fault is and what's caused the fault. So in some cases, the contractor, the liability sits with them and they'll repair it at their cost. In other cases, the cost will sit with us.
Yes, through you, Worship. Just regarding the Te Anau Manapori renewal of 1.3 million, when is that scheduled to happen and sort of why? I mean, I think there's a discussion we need to have around what sort of airport we have there. And in my understanding, it's to keep it where it is, it's a 139 certified airport, which is for aircraft carrying more than 30 passengers, which Te Anau hasn't seen a whole lot of those planes. And even Wanaka hasn't got that standard. So I just wonder whether before we go and spend 1.3 million, we need to have a discussion on what we're going to do at this airport, because I don't know that there's a lot of point spending a lot of money to get it up to that standard when there's no aircraft of 30 and above coming to Te Anau. And also with an aircraft of that capacity to come from Christchurch to Te Anau, it's on the fuel thing, it's right on the limits of the fuel, so that's sort of unlikely to happen.
Yeah, I believe there's an appetite from the Te Anau Fiordland Community Board, to explore that as well. So do you want to talk to that, Matt?
Through you, Your Worship. Councillor Chamberlain, the 139 certification requirement was imposed on us by CAA as a result of the seasonal charter flights that the airport receives and also freight. So it's not just the passenger numbers, it's also any aircraft over 3,500 kg. So our options were to either discontinue the tourist activity and the charter flights, and discontinue the freight flights that were operating out of the aerodrome, or to get the certification. We'd previously had a dispensation from CAA, which enabled us to circumvent the need to have that certification, but they, for whatever reason, they determined that that was no longer an appropriate solution for Te Anau Minapori. Through the last LTP, and certainly we're more than happy to revisit that and encourage the discussion absolutely with both the community board and council around the strategic nature or otherwise of the facility. Through the last LTP, we tested that with both the community board and the council, and both the community board and the council were of a mind that it is a strategic asset, and we do want to continue to invest in the facility. The runway, in terms of the quality and condition of the runway, it isn't, and there are sections of that runway that are old, originally going down in the 60s, I think. And is it the PCN rating? Is that the appropriate terminology?
Yep, pavement condition.
There's a pavement condition. Is it PCR or is it PCN? Anyway, the pavement condition number or the pavement condition rating, whichever the acronym is, determined that we were right on the cusp of failing that rating. So the runway, given its age and condition, was starting to show signs of there's a lot of cracking. So we've been having to do a lot of crack seal repairs over in recent years. There's pooling of water with dips and subsidence in areas, and as soon as you get water into a pavement, I'm sure you'll know yourself, it very quickly heads downhill from that point. So that's the balance, I guess, we're attempting to strike. Anything you want to add?
Yes, just I suppose it's a lot like a road to a certain extent, or painting the outside of your house. Eventually you do have to paint it, otherwise the water gets in and you have bigger problems. And that's really what the resurfacing, to a large extent, is trying to cover. But just agree with Matt in terms of it's up for discussion long term as to the future of the runway and the level of service associated with that runway.
Look, I think Sarah might know. I'm pilot. I mean, I've done a lot of training, I've done a lot of landing, so I know the place pretty well. So, but talking with operators and people that have worked in Wanaka Airport, it doesn't have the same rating, but it's got a lot more activity, and I guess probably people find that there's not the appetite or the even people wanting to buy sections or set up business there. It's hard work trying to get answers out of councils, and it's put people off going to Te Anau to set up operations there. I just think that it just needs a really good overhaul and rethink.
Through you, Your Worship, certainly hear that, Councillor Chamberlain. I think that just to temper that a little bit, because I can't help myself, the main point of contention with the aviation community is that they want to purchase. They want to purchase land in order to invest in a private hangar or accommodation option on the site. Council's position to date, and certainly my advice at this point, is that as soon as you subdivide and divest that land, you lose all value in the facility long term. The value in the facility is in the land side. You'll know yourself as an aviator, air side is not a financially viable opportunity. It's the land side that supports the air side. Soon as you divest, you can only do it once. As soon as it's gone, it's gone. And as soon as you cut up the sections, you also further complicate future ownership opportunities. Should the community and council determine that at some stage in the future they may want to hand it over to another owner. So my advice, obviously council's decision, community board's decision, my advice remains do not subdivide.
I think with all that in mind, there's definitely the need to starting with community board, actually do a wider discussion around all of this going forward, and potentially doing that quite soon, feeding into that next long-term plan process. So
I think there is a real opportunity to go out and look at other airports. You know, I know that they haven't got the runway that Manapori has, but you go to Cromwell, Alex, Rangiora, there's a lot of stuff happening around those airports.
I think Whittyang is another one that's been
There is one that's been recommended.
And even with the terminal, you know, you can go to a lot of airports and terminals are open, toilets, facilities are good. You go to Manapori, it's locked up by Fort Knox, you know, you can't. So it doesn't encourage people to come there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely scope for that wider discussion, and yeah, something we should schedule in. Councillor Menzies, since you still.
Another quick question. So, Hartley, just the John Street road issues. Have you located a reason for that failure out there, and what's the next steps?
No, I personally don't know. I'd have to follow up with the team on that. It's looking after the project. I can get back to you with that.
And that would be good to have back, well, it won't be done by the 5th of December, the next community board, so it would be good to have for the following one. Has that been resurfaced and it's okay, or?
It should be, but that's part of, I suppose, the methodology around how you repair, because, as I said, with the roads, you don't want to be putting on too much seal too soon, because then it creates longer term problems.
Do you know what the problem was for the failure in the first place?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'll get back to you on that.
Councillor East.
Your Worship, Hartley, the comms team do a great job putting out daily updates about where the roading is. When they said that they were resealing on the Gorge Road Tokanui Highway, and I asked for a little bit more detail because I thought because it's 27 k's long, so some people would be able to avoid areas if they knew where it was, and it was a very flippant sort of response that must have come back to them. I'm not sure whether it was the contractors or our team that they were out in the east. It's a great service, but actually they could help themselves a little bit by being a little bit more specific, because it is done on a daily basis, so people know they're in the area, they'll be watching where they're going and could possibly avoid the area.
That's good feedback. I'll pass that on. As you say, particularly for longer roads.
Yes.
So riding for the roads, maybe a K or two, but.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just quick for clarification, that airport is locally funded, isn't it? Like that 1.3s from the local rates up there.
Sorry, the Fiordland Community Board, yeah. Councillor Wilson.
Hartley, excuse me, Hartley, I was just wondering if there's an update on the team heading up to Piano Flat, the inspections of the missing signage.
Yep. So, no, they haven't made it up there yet. Over the last week and this week, the team's predominantly been out doing our annual road survey, which is the gravel road rough survey. It's still on the radar, haven't forgot about it.
Not likely to happen before the community's meeting up there on the 6th next week.
I can get back to you on that. From a timing point of view.
Sorry, Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Worship. Hartley, you'll be aware of conversations over the last probably several years, going back to the beginning where you were talking about issues with fuel and infrastructure and costs in general with the wide network of roading that we have. I've had a lot of landowners approaching me, and I'm sure a lot of the other councillors, with regards to repair work on gravel roads. And, they're sort of saying, well, our rivers and our creeks are filling up with gravel and we can't get rid of it, or we're not allowed to get rid of it, and all this sort of, we're all familiar with this. Based on what you said at the beginning, with some of those pressures on the fuel and getting from A to B in certain locations, is there any more dialogue around that in terms of being able to utilise, that extra detritus that's come down creeks?
Good question, and there is potentially in some places, but it is an ongoing discussion with Environment Southland in particular. At the moment, they, across various rivers, undertaking survey work and comparing that to previous survey work, because in some cases there has been, I suppose, an increase in levels, but in other cases there's actually been, I suppose, the take's been greater. So the most recent discussion, I suppose, holistically, there's been more taken out of the rivers, is the way I understand it. But there's potential opportunity, I suppose, to look at things like skimming of certain beaches where there's particular build-up. That's part of a greater piece of work that's currently being undertaken by Environment Southland. But we're on constant discussion with them around those, because there's potentially mutual benefit. Unfortunately, for some of the locations where we've got consent, to date they're quite remote and far away from where the work is, so that can also be the challenge is, yep, we've got a great source, we can get hold of it, but it's not where we want to do the work. So that's I suppose, the other challenge.
And I guess the quality of the material is variable as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be variable. Generally, Northern Southland tends to produce good material, and then as you get further down the river, there's obviously more pressure on the rivers from a take point of view, and that's where we can struggle to find a good aggregate that can be crushed down. And that also tends to, unfortunately, often be where we're doing some of the major works. So it is a challenge, and I got from a resource point of view, it's going to be an ongoing challenge. I can't see it getting any easier going forward.
Well, I guess that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because you have a relationship with Environment Southland, and the problem is starting at the top of the mountain, right? So I guess the dialogue between Environment Southland and yourselves in terms of being able to mitigate in the first place, say with landowners or farmers, and how that relationship between Environment Southland and those farmers can work to stop or to slow down that process. Is that something that you engage in?
To date, we haven't engaged to that extent. But certainly something we can take up with them and explore. Don't see why not as part of a greater conversation.
Happy with the roading side of things?
I just I noticed the gravel roads in our area are in great condition, I think, for the time of year. But just recently there was a top coat put on that Stirling Hill which got sealed last year. I think it would be good when those jobs are being done, because people were saying, what the hell are they resealing that for and not doing Makatua? So it was explained the reason for the top coat going on, and that standard practice, it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, so they would, generally after we've rebuilt the road, within the first 12 to 24 months, it gets another sort of waterproofing coat on, and then you walk away. So, yeah, I appreciate people may not necessarily always understand it.
No, they don't. And they know quite a bit about it.
Must be a good time to break for lunch, so yeah, thank you, Hatley, and
thank you.
We'll adjourn the meeting for lunch. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the meeting too. And we're going to move on to the next report on forestry under the services and assets. A3s.
Yes, Your Worship and Councillors, firstly, congratulations on your appointment to Council. I'm Stuart O'Neill, the Commercial Infrastructure Manager for Southland Council. Commercial infrastructure sphere of influence concerns itself with CIASA and forestry and other contractual matters. And I think there's some pretty significant, exciting opportunities ahead in this triennium, and it's going to make a fairly significant, positive, sustainable impact to our ratepayers. And I'm certainly thrilled to be on that journey with you and our wider ratepayer team. So it's really important to put those words and translate that into action. And in this instance, we're discussing forestry and orientating the portfolio on a clearly defined strategy that provides for maximised net profit in a sustainable manner and aligned to and supporting our corporate strategies that you as councillors govern. So I'll take the report as read. I think firstly it's important to define the purpose of the forestry portfolio, which is to provide the greatest net return to the forestry reserve, which we then utilise elsewhere in the business. In June this year, STC initiated a process of aligning the forestry management strategy with Council's corporate management objectives as closely as possible. The principal corporate management objective being to maximise the return to the forestry over a 25-year life cycle. The result of that is that the forestry portfolio will transition from a clearwood regime to a framing regime and create a more consistent, sustainable revenue stream that's significantly above in terms of net profit per annum over the next 25 years into perpetuity.
Sorry, Stuart, can I just interrupt? Are you talking about that A3 sheet, or you moved into the next?
Sorry, I can refer to that.
We need to move into public excluded for the next, which we haven't moved into public. Excuse me. Haven't moved into public excluded yet for that next report. So it's still under the services and assets, just to confirm.
Yep. So, just referring to this report, a lot of the content in this does lead itself towards the public excluded report. So perhaps it's best to align that discussion to that public excluded discussion. But there is other matters, which is I've got here in the strategic planning priorities, which is the forestry carbon management plan, which we're working on to ensure that the carbon management plan aligns with the forestry management plan. In reference to carbon, that is, what impact does our forestry portfolio have around any sort of carbon offsets that we might have in the business? So in the very early stages of understanding what that's all about. And secondly is the IFS and Waikawa Mountain Bike Trail Trust that we are coordinating to ensure that we have a dual purpose over that forestry area, support that local community with the trail trust being established in Waikawa. Any questions, Ruben?
No questions? Might have luck, we're going after lunch. You want me? Councillor Keys? Yeah.
So that you don't feel like you're missing out.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Worship. The strategic priority of the forestry carbon management plan to be developed. Can you enlighten us on what's involved in that?
Look, it's a very promising area for council. Is the carbon, the value of carbon in our forestry, and it's very important to try and understand it and communicate the value of that and what its purpose will be long term. The projection for carbon is rising very favourably, and we want to capture that trend and make sure that any corporate objectives that we have moving forward are aligned to that so that we can maximise our opportunities. So we're in the very early stages of understanding what's involved in that, and I'm going to come back to you with a lot more context, opportunities and strategic direction that we might take with it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Chambers?
Just sort of brings me up to speed, but what sort of area of the total forestry is post 1990 that you can claim the credits on?
I don't know the exact hectares, but that is Dipton and Gowan Hills, and we have those areas which we look at over that. Yep.
Cool. Any further questions? Yeah, Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Stuart. Just wondering, this is all pine trees, isn't it?
Some is Douglas fir. Yep.
And the end market for these are overseas? They're on a truck and
it's wherever the biggest dollar is actually, as the rise here. So in our harvesting plan, we're looking to get the biggest value out of that. It so happens that when we go through that harvesting processing activity, a lot of it does that the harvesting value stays within Southland in terms of local mills or the port or things like that. Yeah. Also, it wholly depends on the grade of the log that you're harvesting as to where that goes. And yeah, we can probably ask when we have a harvest plan that we know where we're going to harvest and the grade of those logs. That's something I can report back to you about exactly where that's going.
Just in general, I'm thinking, well, there's those pines and Douglas fir, but has there been any consideration for other slower growing trees that could be of use for local markets? And I'm sort of going back to Japan, where they grow a lot of cedar, and then they use that for building in their local economies.
Yeah, no, there definitely is. We look at the forestry portfolio and bring it back to its original purpose, which is to maximise the net return. When we're doing that, you could look at it in two different perspectives. One is the maximum revenue that you can create, which that does lend itself to the species of trees you're getting in a longer term tree or life cycle, would perhaps create a bigger revenue, but it's going to impact on cost. So that arises at a greater cost per log. So what we're trying to do is generate the greatest amount of net return over a much greater life cycle. So in pragmatic terms, a Douglas fir might be 48, 50 years, something to that degree on some forestry areas. You're putting a lot of cost at that, but if you're using a Pinus radiata tree, you're going to get 1.5 cycles out of that. So 25 plus another 15, so you're getting more net revenue out of that choice of species. So we ran that through a number of species through the tiger moth model, which is our forestry model that determines the commercial strategy for it. And we found ourselves in line with the rest of the industry in forestry that is looking to maximise their return across the portfolio. It was consistent with what most of the country's done.
Yeah, it's a big space, isn't it?
Yes.
There's, I guess, there's potential for someone to invest today in some other species, and it might not be the council space, but other species that have the potential to create quite a significant local economy. You compare that with pines that a lot of them on trucks and off.
It's very interesting. Sorry, Matt.
No, I was just going to add through your worship. You've heard Stuart today mention a couple of times the objective of maximising return. If council were of a mind to shift that lens towards, and integrate some considerations around local economy and or biodiversity, then that would certainly change the inputs and resultant design and future decision making within that tiger moth model. So certainly that's some discussion I'd encourage through the upcoming LTP when it comes to the objectives for the portfolio. Is it just to offset rates and maximise return, or are there some other levers that council wants to consider in conjunction with that portfolio?
And to speak of those levers, that is carbon. So Pinus is producing the best result for carbon for council in comparison to other species that we've initially done a high level assessment of.
So you'll be, through your worship, so you'll be subject to the liabilities associated with harvesting and replanting or replanting, as it were.
We certainly are.
And so the risks or the opportunity cost, forgive me because I'm unfamiliar with the topography, and there are some obviously political debates going on about land use with Pinus, Radiata, and farmland as an example, whether it's appropriate or not. Is there the opportunity cost of putting it back into trees versus using it for some other purpose based on the topography?
The ground that we have in our forestry portfolio is suited to its purpose, and I think that's probably fits into Matt's comments earlier, that if we wish to do something else with it, that's something that we could discuss further down the track. Happy to do that. At the moment, we've got a very stable business unit right across the board.
Excellent.
Yeah, performing very well and helping to contribute to the rating.
Yes, certainly is.
So yeah, it's a valuable resource.
Yes, I think next time, or the next meeting that we have, I might produce an fly-over video, a drone video of the forestry blocks to familiarise yourself with what we're doing. And I might also capture some harvest operation and some of the work we're doing around environmental considerations when we do harvest, how we capture silt runoff, and how we might work in the community to make sure that we're lowering our impacts and where it's going to, what purpose it has.
So based on that financial model, is there room to scale this?
If you be more specific,
can you grow more forestry on council property? Is there room to be able to do that?
Through you, Your Worship, we did a couple of years ago undertake an assessment, Councillor O'Brien, of what other land holdings council has across its various activity portfolios to ascertain just that, whether there was opportunity for further planting. And what we found was, although council has a really significant property holding, they generally tend to be smaller in scale and size. So on paper, if you looked at the list, there's some, I think from memory, there are 850 odd lines of separate property titles, but a lot of them were small marginal strips or easements or there was very limited opportunity. When we filtered it down to properties that were over I think it was the 30 hectare, no, not 30 hectares, sorry, I'm getting myself tripped up here. There's a threshold for attracting carbon and your minimum plot size, and I'm sorry, I don't recall. There's
2.5 hectares.
2.5 hectares, is it? Sorry, Councillor Bice, thank you. We only had roughly half a dozen sites that fit that criteria, and when we looked at those further, as an example, there were a couple of them that were better suited to the farming and agricultural purposes for which they were leased, rather than taking them out of that environment and turning them into forestry plots. So that's not to say that council couldn't, if council had an appetite to, couldn't look at other more marginal areas of land, talk to DOC, talk to other landowners that may want to lease sites longer term for planting, that couldn't be something that council looked at. And that's not just limited again to forestry and maximising revenue. Council could do that for other reasons if it wanted to. Not something we've explored to date.
As you say, it comes back to the economics.
Yeah.
Really, with that size fit into the costs associated with the scenario probably.
Yeah, it's definitely a scale to that time, but in order to keep one step ahead of things, certainly made a high level assessment of council is in the same boat as the private investor when it comes to forestry. It is looking favourable. got to fit inside a much bigger picture. But I'm certainly here to serve you if you want to go down that path. It's something that.
Thanks very much, Stuart. That was great, and yeah, thanks to the rest of the team as well. There's some good, a lot of information in those reports. It's yeah, they were very valuable and a good discussion with it as well. So, is someone in a position to move that we receive that report? Councillor Menzies, do we have a seconder? Councillor Sprague, all in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? That's carried. Thanks very much. Right, so we're now going to move into a public excluded for the final two items on the agenda. Does someone happy to move for the reasons contained in the agenda? That we move into public forum? Public excluded. Thanks, Councillor Bryan. All in favour? Anyone against? Carried. We'll just wait for the live feed to